Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We get a little bit of a reprieve from the in-season tournament, which will resume Tuesday, and we get to talk all about it on Friday's episode. But in today's episode, we'll be revisiting some of our earlier takes in the season and giving you some new ones and seeing how those have aged. And before we kick that off, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we're pretty much, at the 20 game mark into the season now for a lot of these teams. So we're
Yeah.
pretty much a quarter of the way through the season. And obviously, we'll have the, continuation of the in-season tournament coming up, but like you said, we're going to kind of go back and kind of look at some of our takes from earlier parts of the season and kind of
Yeah.
see like if they continue to hold up. And then also like you said also mention some new ones. So I guess the first one I'll start with, in terms of, I guess, sort of like a good surprise or something was one that I had where I said Denver was better than last year.
Right.
So right after I said that, it seemed like Denver was kind of starting to slide a little bit. Some of that is, in fairness, they've had some injuries, right? They've had games where, like, Jamal Murray's been out, Aaron Gordon's been out. They even had a game where Jokic was out, although I think that was the one they won against the Clippers.
Yeah.
But as of late, right? Then they've played a little bit better as of late. They did have a game, the second night of a back to back where they lost to the Kings. But other than that, it still feels like for the most part, I think there should be mostly positive takes. They have made some changes to the rotation. A couple of the young guys are no longer really playing. Like, Zeke Naji, right? He's been kind of taken out of the rotation for DeAndre Jordan. Right. So, which is kind of interesting just given DeAndre Jordan's age and the fact that he hadn't really been a consistent rotational player in quite some time. But, he's been able to give them, I guess, meaningful minutes off the bench at times. And again, he even had a game against the Clippers where he kind of helped lead the way to a win. So, I don't know. I mean, again, I, now that hopefully they're starting to get some of their guys back and maybe they're going to have a little bit more of a sense of, who's going to be in the rotation. I still feel like, this team, when they're locked in, they're still really good. I mean, they're 14-7. I believe they're third in the Western Conference. As of right now, as of this recording. So they're still right up there. So I'm not really, concerned. It's just a matter of, can they get, continue to have a stretch where they can have all their guys, and that is kind of in a way the tough part of being able to go back to back. If that, and we know that that's their goal. Obviously, is that you got to be able to stay healthy two
Yeah.
seasons in a row, and they were pretty healthy last year. After having kind of a bad, string of years, right, back-to-back years where they had injuries. So we'll see. I still feel like, it seems like they're still the best team in the Western Conference, although, there are some other teams that are playing very well, right, in the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So we'll see. I mean, the West definitely feels like it's stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's more good teams, and some of the teams that were, you know, okay last year right now are a lot better, right? Like it feels like Minnesota's gotten a lot better, Oklahoma City's gotten better. There's a couple of teams where it feels like they may be a little bit worse, or at the very least, some other teams have kind of come in to take their place, right? Like Golden State was better than Oklahoma City last year. This year, it doesn't seem like that's the case, right? The
Right.
Clippers kind of continue to hang around. New Orleans is trying to make a push, right? Now that they're starting to get all their guys back. So, um, we'll see because there's a lot of noise, I think, surrounding, a lot of these teams. And, Denver's kind of been relatively quiet just in the sense of like, I guess, they don't always draw a ton of attention, but, I still feel like right now, I still feel like that may continue to hold up. It's just a matter of can they stay healthy. But I do think there's a couple of young guys that have been standouts. I think Brown has continued to play well. Strother's continued to look good. And it seems like they've been able to kind of get more out of Reggie Jackson, so that helps as well, right? Because he was pretty much a negative for Denver last year, but now he's actually been a legitimate part of the rotation. So
Yeah.
that's a good sign, I think, if you're Denver, because at the very least, it gives you somebody to turn to when Jamal Murray's out, right? Whereas before, you were kind of struggling with the options you had. So, I like that there's a little bit more optionality with the guards, but at the same time, I still continue to worry somewhat about some of those guys off the bench. But at the same time, we'll see what happens at the deadline, and then we'll also see because there you could just have a scenario where you just in the playoffs you're not playing those guys as much, and then it's not even really a problem. So
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I don't think it's aged poorly at all. If we look at recently. You know, they're 9-0 at home, so they haven't lost at home. That's a great sign. They did just recently lose, but you know, in the past 10 games, I think they're 5-5. So it's not, you know, danger zone territory, and they're 14-7, like you said. That's puts them right at third. And I don't think they should be worried because I think the West is so close right now. I know every game does count, but other teams are also going to lose games. But their main problem has been the health. You know, Jamal Murray being out recently, that doesn't help. And I think, you know, he's like such a key factor for them. So I 100% agree. And I don't think that the take has aged badly at all. I think it's just fine. Um, yeah, I had an interesting take. I'm gonna start with another positive. I think most of mine were positive, if not all of them. But yeah, so in the last episode that we did involving this segment, yeah, I chose Philly. I had talked about Philly. I think they had surprised me. I think they had also surprised you as well. At the time, they were doing very well. Tyrese Maxey was on a tear. Embiid, obviously, on a tear. Recently, you know, they've kind of slid, but I know they are on a 2-game losing streak, I believe, and then their record over the last 10 games is 4-6. So they haven't been, you know, the greatest, I don't think. But, you know, it's kind of interesting how similar, you know, both the conferences are at the top 4 seeds right now, or the top four slots. You know, everybody's pretty much like a game or two behind each other or in front, you know. So it is tight. It's a tight race, but I think, you know, Philly has slid a little bit, but not to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, like this is not good at all. I think this is kind of where I expected them to be, but the surprise was that they were at the top of the East, but now they have dropped 2. So I guess it has aged a little bit poorly, but not horribly, because I think most of the guys on this team are still playing at a very elite level.
Yeah, and I think definitely what hadn't helped them as of late was they were starting to miss some guys, right? Like
Yeah.
Embiid missed a couple of games, Tyrese Maxey missed a couple of games right there. I think they had that game against the Celtics where they were both out because of illness,
Yeah.
right? Oubre, you know, he had
That
been out, but
hurts.
he'll be back, you know, sometime this week. You know, we'll see. So
Yeah.
I think, I think overall, I still think Philly has looked very good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of I'm curious to see what direction they try to go to as they approach the trade deadline. Do they decide to kind of cash in on what's going on right now and, you know, maybe see if they can pick up some type of star or some type of disgruntled star on a bad
Right.
team, you know, that's available for trade? Or do they just kind of play it out and see how it goes this year and then try their luck in free agency? You know, I'm curious to see what they decide to do, but I still think overall they're in a pretty good spot in regards to, you know, they patched up the chemistry, they got a better coach, so it definitely feels like this team has improved. You
For
know,
sure.
I still don't think they're the best team in the Eastern Conference,
Right.
but at the same time, if you're Philly, you have to be pretty happy, given the fact that, like, you know, a lot of people, you know, ourselves included, kind of were, you know, of the mindset of like they got to get something good back for Harden.
Yeah.
Um, but I think even though they didn't necessarily get a star, right, that what they did get back was flexibility. So when they did the trade at the time, we actually liked it more for Philly.
Yeah.
And so far, I do think that that has played out where Philly's in a good spot where they can continue to win games and look really good. And then if they want, they can either cash in and get better or, you know, play their odds in free agency. So I think so far they've gotten the best of both worlds. So I think that's still aging pretty well.
Yeah.
Because again, like you said, they've slid a little bit, but I think some of that has also just been due to bad luck in terms of some guys being
Right.
out. Next up, another one I had was Chet Holmgren, right? So you know, again, that one I don't think has really changed. You know, obviously, I think some of the numbers efficiency wise were crazy. You know, to be
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so obviously, like, you know, some of that has kind of cooled down a little bit, right? You know, he's 53% from the field, 39.5 from three. I think he was at like somewhere close to like 60 from the field and
Yeah.
like 50 something percent from the three early in the year. That, like I said, that wasn't going to stay. But the fact that, you know, he's, you know, in that 50, 40, 90 range already, you know, as a rookie, you know, that's a good sign. And I think the fact that he's been as productive as he's been, that bodes well for Oklahoma City because, again, we talked about it in the offseason, right? Obviously, they didn't do a whole lot in terms of free agency because they chose not to, right? They don't normally get a lot of free agents. So it was more so about the internal development of the young guys. Then maybe could they get anything out of the guys in the draft, right? You know, we already talked about it with Case and Wallace and, you know, some of the other young guys looking better for Oklahoma City as well. But I still feel like that one's aged pretty well, where I think we were both pretty high on him and thought that he'd be really good. This good, where it seems like he could potentially be the guy that pulls out Rookie of the Year. You know, maybe that's a little bit higher than we thought, but at the same time, I think we both thought that he would be one of the best
Yeah.
players because also he had the extra year to be able to rehab and just be around NBA guys, and I think that matters as well. So I don't
Yeah.
think I have to spend too much time on that one. I think
Yeah.
this one is aged pretty well.
Yeah, it definitely has, and it's like, I think even with the year that he did take off due to the injury, well, not take off, he didn't take it off, but he was forced to take it off because of the injury. Even with that year, I don't think anybody expected him to be this great already. The impact that he does have on this team. I mean, they've completely taken over the West. They're sitting at number 2 right now at 13-6. We'll see if that stays. Like I said, the games are so close, and the win-loss differentials are crazy right now in the West. It is tight, but regardless, I think Chet is one of the driving factors for why they are in this position, and you can't take that away from him. The efficiency, like you said, has been down from earlier in the season, but that was, I think, at least 3 weeks ago. So, um, there's not much to be said. Like you said, I think he has overtaken Wemby. I think for Rookie of the Year at the moment, I think Wemby's efficiency is a little bit lower. But I mean, what do you really expect? OKC's such a great team. Wemby's doesn't really have a lot of guys around him right now. OKC, they've got a real legit starting five. So I definitely think that take has aged beautifully so far. My next one, I think this one might be one that kind of aged like milk a little bit, and that's Indiana. They're good. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I was very surprised when they did come out of the gates red hot and like on turbo mode, but I think the numbers don't lie, but the win-loss ratio does lie a little bit. It's hard because I know they beat the Heat, but then they also lost to them previously as well. But then they lose to teams like the Trailblazers, the Raptors. So we don't really know I don't really know how to judge them. I think they do have great talent on the roster for sure. Halliburton is, one of one right now in the league, but at the end of the day, is the team one of one? I don't think so, and that's why I think they've fallen to 6, and they're sitting at 10-8, which isn't bad by any means, but over the last 10, they've gone 500, 5-5. They are on a 1-game win streak. But in general, recently I think they have taken a dip and have cooled off just a little bit from when I did make this initial take when they were scorching hot, dropping 150, 140 something points.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that again, we already know where they're, a great offensive team. It's
Yep.
just obviously the defense is not there.
Yeah.
And, a team, that's built like that is probably going to be more up and down, because obviously, if they're averaging as many points as the average, right? I mean, like, they're almost at 130, I think,
Yeah.
or something like that with, some crazy number. But, when you do that every night, obviously you got a chance to win a lot of regular season games. But then there's times where again, if you have a game where you're like maybe just a little bit off offensively, right? That defense, well, there's no fix for that,
You can't
unless
hide
the
it.
has a cold night. So I think that's the issue there and I think both of us thought that Indiana would be better. It was just a matter of how much better would they be. I didn't necessarily expect them to be like a top 4 seed,
Yeah.
just because I still felt like, again, the teams that were towards the top of the East last year, I thought would still be there, except maybe you might exchange a couple and maybe swap a few around. Like the Bucks and the Celtics and the Sixers are still there, and they were towards the top of the East last year. A couple of teams are a little bit lower, right? Like Cleveland is lower. But at the same time, right, like the Knicks are about where they were. The Magic have gone way up, right? So,
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing is for the Pacers, they're definitely better than last year. So I guess, at the very least, that's kind of a surprise. I
Sure.
mean, in the sense of like, we didn't expect them to be, as good as they've been, I guess, but at the same time, it still feels like they're probably still going to probably be towards the lower half of the Eastern Conference playoff
Right.
bracket unless they can find a way to shore up that defense, which that's probably going to have to come in the form of a trade because again they don't have like a ton of great defensive players. They have some that are individually good defenders, but they don't have a lot of them as a team, and that's the issue there. And again, that was kind of what most people expected going into the season, which is why
Absolutely.
and clearly the focus is offense. So I don't know necessarily if it's aged like milk. I guess it's more so just like you said. I guess the way they started off early on made it seem like they would be like a top 4
Yeah.
seed,
It
but
was
now
very
it seems
premature, I'll
probably
say.
yeah, but now they're probably going to even out more towards like a you know somewhere between like 5 and 8, something
Right.
like that. It just kind of depends on some of these other teams, right? I guess the saving grace for them is that the lower half of the Eastern Conference honestly has been decidedly from anywhere from like mediocre to just downright bad.
Right.
Um, So I think that's the saving grace for them, where they're not going to fall off, like a ridiculous rate, unless the
Yeah.
offense takes a massive dip, which I don't see that happening, unless Halliburton is out for like an extended stretch like last year.
Yeah.
So,
Because he's
um,
shooting like
I don't
50, 40, 90 almost right now. So that's
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly.
He's been
Yeah,
chasing that for a while.
right. Yeah, he's the engine of their offense. So if
Yeah.
he's out for an extended period of time, like most teams, right? When your best player is out, you're probably going to have some issues.
Yes.
Um, but at the same time, I feel like this is what the record is right now. 10-8 is probably a little bit closer to what they actually are, which is like a team that's better than 500, but
Right.
not like a 60% win team. You
Right.
know what I mean?
They're
Like a
back
team.
down to earth. I get it.
Yeah, that's what I think. So
Yeah.
that's how I feel about it. Um, Moving on, right? More stuff. Derek Lively, I guess he continues to play really well. Obviously there's gonna be certain matchups where I think, we're kind of learning a little bit more about like, the type of, matchups where he doesn't play as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, obviously if he's playing against like a bigger, stronger type of guy, right,
Yeah.
that's where there's gonna be issues. But at the same time, Dallas, he's been a big factor in terms of why they've been better. Defensively, I think they've definitely slipped because I think they were a lot better early on in the season, which
Mm-hmm.
kind of did to them having a crazy record to start off. Now they're like 23rd in defensive rating. They're 11-8, right? So that's good for sixth in the Western Conference, right? But like you said, in the Western Conference or just around the league in general, everything's so tight. They had a game where they were getting blown out the other night by Oklahoma City. They went on a 30-0 run, to take a late lead, but then unfortunately couldn't pull it out. And
Yep. They
that is
sold.
kind of a thing where like, all the energy that you expend to get back into the game when you're down by so much. We've seen it before, right? That's how a lot of teams, end up, losing, right? Where it's
Right.
like, oh man, like they were up, why couldn't they close it out? And it's like, well, the problem is that you have to play perfect basketball just to get back into the game. And then if you make just a couple of mistakes, right, which you're probably prone to do, when you're gassed like that, right, then the other team can kind of just take the momentum right back. And then before you know it, it's over.
Yeah.
So it's
And
like,
yeah.
and obviously you don't want to, your preference is to not get blown out, but it's almost like, man, you ended up playing a ton of minutes just to still lose. But at the same time, I still feel like with Dallas, there's still more positives than negatives, right? Luka's been great. And that's obviously something where we kind of talked about it in the offseason where it's like, well, the ceiling could potentially be higher if Luka is better than he was last year. And, this season, 31, 8.5, 8.5, right? But, the key here, 49 from the field, just under 39% from three, right? And that's kind of the cool factor of his game, right? That definitely helps because when you have a guy like a Kyrie Irving who can also, score, and take possessions over, it's nice to be able to have a guy in Luka who, is taking just under 10 threes a game and making almost 40% of them. So that's a really good sign while still being really efficient, right? 49% from the field. So I think the offensive uptick, for sure, which again, he's in better shape. He's running the floor more, doing a lot more stuff. So that's good to see. I think that's kind of the coolest part, other than Lively and also just having some better role players, right? Like, Derek Jones Jr., right? He's played very well. You're getting sort of a bounce back year from Tim Hardaway Jr. So there's still a lot to like about this team. It does feel like they've evened out a little bit more, right? Because, they were crazy hot to begin the season. So
Yeah.
now it feels like, that we're probably going to see them probably even out closer to like, maybe they might be able to get that top six seed, but like maybe like closer to like 5, 6. We'll just have to see because again, like some of these other teams that are below them may potentially be poised to make a run. And if, they slip and lose a few games here and there, while the other teams go on winning streaks, right? That's, kind of something to look at because I think there's a couple of teams that are below Dallas. Well, yeah, yeah, like at least like two or three where I could see a scenario where those teams kind of catch up and maybe overtake them. But either way, if you're Dallas, the fact that you're actually playing pretty well this year, that's the good news, right? And I think, it while I feel like surprise wise, it maybe hasn't aged quite as well. At the same time, because I think your surprise was Dallas as a whole, and
Yes.
mine was
Yeah.
Lively. So I feel like just as a whole in general, again, like they've been a little bit worse as of late, but I still feel like by and large this is still a decent team. Like
Yeah.
it's not a great team, but the fact that your superstar has taken another leap forward, that's a big help because again, like when you have one of those type of guys, you always have a chance in any playoff series.
Yeah. And it's funny because like you were saying, I think the Lively take has aged perfectly. I think he's good. I think he's been a surprise. I don't think anybody expected him to be, as mature and as, defensively good. But the Dallas one, like you said, is a little shaky. because they've lost a decent amount of games now. But I think the roster itself, nobody can argue the fact that the roster is 10 times better than it was last year. Obviously, bringing in a guy like Grant Williams, the lively pick, Kyrie, coming back and seemingly being back to true form. I think the efficiency is a little bit down, but nonetheless, I think he's on his way back. And then, like you said, Josh Green, Tim Hardaway, like you said, bounce back year. So I think the team in general has been good, just not great. And at the time, they were playing great, so that's why it was a surprise to me. So I do understand if people are like, yeah, that didn't really age that well. But at the end of the day, they're still, in the race, I think, for the West. And clearly, I think they have the personnel for it. I think you can't discount or discredit the offensive talent that they have in Luka and Kyrie together. I think that's one of the most unstoppable duos in the NBA. It's just their defense is really continuing to hurt them, which is something that's extending on from last year and previous years that we've seen. As with Luka or with these Luka Dallas teams, defense has always been the big question mark.
Yeah, I mean, they started the season off 8-2 in their first 10 games, and then in
Yeah.
the last 9 games, they're a or last whatever games or 8 games, I guess they're 2-6. So I mean, that's
Yeah.
3-6 in the last 9 games. So that part they haven't played as well as of late, and some of that has been some guys have been in and out. Like they lost to Memphis
Right.
a couple nights ago, and I think that was a game where Luca was out. I think because of the birth of his kid.
Yeah.
And then I think the loss to Oklahoma City the other night, right? I think Kyrie was out. So that's the main thing. When they've had both of their guys, that's when they've typically played better. But yeah, it may feel like that hasn't aged quite as well. I still feel like they're better than last year, but towards the top of the West, like they were at the beginning, I don't think that was probably as realistic as what we thought it might be.
Exactly. And then for my next take, this one I think is very polarizing. It's a polarizing player. I'm sure you all can guess who that is. Dylan Brooks. I was very surprised by his play. And it's not like I came out on a limb and said like he was an elite player or anything like that. I was just surprised by his early play. Because earlier in the year, I think he was shooting around like 54 from the three or something like that. It was some crazy number. It was like, okay, this guy's insanely efficient. And the Houston Rockets, I think that was during their win streak as well. But Houston and Dylan Brooks have definitely come back down to earth. Now he's averaging 13 points on 44% from the three. Not bad at all by any means.
Yeah,
And then
way better than last year.
yeah, exactly. And then 47% from the field. So, he has cooled down. I wouldn't say, it's like a horrible take because at the time he was on fire and it was surprising. But yeah, he's just cooled off, and I think that's normal, I guess, for role players and guys that play in his role, where it's more so okay, yeah, we want to look at his defense and can he hit the three when he's wide open. So in the last 10 games, he shot 38% from the three, and then 75 from the free throw line, and then 42 from the field. So, like I said, cooled off a little bit, but nothing to be like crazy concerned about. I think you would be more so concerned about the Rockets in general than Dylan Brooks because I do know that they have been struggling as of recently.
Right, yeah, because that's the thing. He's shooting 48% from the field, which I
Right.
mean, when you look at his career, right, he, outside of, a couple of years, right, he had been like 40%.
Yeah, the
Last year
average is
was at
41.
Yeah, last year was at 39.6.
Right.
But now he's at 48, like you said, which is a career high, by a decent amount. And 44% from three. It's just obviously there are some games where he's just kind of up and down, but the team has been up and down because,
Yeah.
like you said, they started, they had that early part of the year where they lost their first 3 games, then they won like 6 in a row. Um, so then they were 6-3, and we were like, oh, wow, this Houston team looks really, really, really good. And like you said, since then they've come back down to earth. They're 8-9. And again, like to me, my thought process was like, I don't think this is like a top tier playoff team. They're definitely better than I think we both thought. It's definitely a much more serious team, which I
Yeah.
think is a good sign, for Houston fans in general, because they've had some pretty bad basketball. So that's definitely been turned around, but it still feels like I think that there's just something missing, and part of that is just some of the other guys on the roster are just kind of inconsistent, right? Like Jalen Green, has been pretty up and down for most of the season, and
Hmm.
that was the number 2 pick. That's the guy, that ideally you would hope, would take a step forward considering he's in year 3. Some of the other guys, like say like a Jabari Smith Jr., he's in his second year and he's actually been pretty good as of late. So you like to see that. But again, with Jalen Green, he's in year 3, right? He's kind of the guy where you're kind of looking to him for some scoring from the perimeter. right? Because obviously Van Vliet, he can do that too, but he's obviously not, that efficient.
Right.
He's 39% from the field, 38 from three, which is, about in line with what he normally does. Like I said, Jabari Smith, 13 and 8, right? 50 from the field, 36 from three. So you like to see that. Shengun, obviously, we talked about him multiple times where he's been awesome. He's basically been their best player. Obviously, it's just, again, the Jalen Green thing. That's where you're kind of disappointed because, again, like, you know, just in terms of his scoring when he's hot, and he can, he can really do some damage, just from everywhere, right? Because he's so athletic,
Yeah.
he's so quick. But at the same time, then he has games and stretches where it's just not working, right? Where it's like, poor shot selection, bad shot making, right? Like, against Denver, right? Even though they lost, he had 26 and 9 assists, right? But
Right.
then in the Laker game, he was 4 for 15, 10 points, 6 turnovers, and it didn't even feel like he was out there, pretty much, So other than some of his mistakes are loud mistakes, but
Yeah.
outside of that, going back to Dylan Brooks, I feel like that take is still held up pretty well because again, their slide, I mean, he's gonna be up and down because he's
Right.
not a star player,
Right.
but at the same time, he's still playing pretty well for Houston and fitting in really well. So I think that take overall has aged well. It just feels like with Houston, we might, I think some people may have needed to pump the brakes, when they went on that big winning streak. Because I still think it's definitely better than what it was before. And,
The
hey,
improvement is there.
yeah, exactly. The improvement is there, and there's still some potential room to grow, right? What if Jalen Green, over the course of the season, kind of figures it out and turns it around, and then all of a sudden that kind of sparks a Houston run? It could definitely happen.
Yeah.
Maybe Alperen Şengün just goes on a huge tear where he kind of like, almost single-handedly carries the team, for like a six,
That wouldn't
seven.
surprise me.
Yeah, that could definitely happen. So this definitely still feels like a solid team. The defense is still
Yeah.
really good. The main thing, obviously, is the offense has been so up and down, and that's what happens when you have a number of young guys on the roster. Because
Yeah.
I think, defensively, that's how they're going to win games. They're going to have to find ways to get stops. They switch everything. They got a lot of feisty guys that compete, but offensively, other than Shengun, you don't really have like another consistent scorer. And I think you need at least one either on the wings or the perimeter. And, I guess because Brooks has been pretty efficient, you'd like for that guy to be on the perimeter. And they don't really have that because Van Vliet, obviously he has games where he can get on a heater, but he's still not an efficient offensive
Yeah.
player, even though he can do other things well in terms of playmaking. And then Jalen Green, when both of your guards are not shooting all that well, that's a major problem because I think that's kind of where you sort of look at maybe they could find a way to improve. And they have some pieces that aren't even playing, that they can maybe move, in terms of looking to improve the roster. Like we talked about it in the last episode, right? They have guys like Oladipo, right? Like Jock Landale,
Bullock, I
is
think.
playing it all. Yeah, among and other guys, right? And but just overall, they're still better. The team as a whole is still better than what I thought. Because I thought they would probably be like, in somewhere in that like 12, 13 spot. But right now they're 10th. Although, they're a spot, ahead of Golden State, I think a couple losses above them. So we'll see. Because there's definitely time to sell, but there's also some potentially some room to improve. But I think it starts with most of the young guys because I think the vets overall have held up, even though Van Vliet the efficiency isn't there. But I think Brooks has done his part. Like I
Yeah.
said, there's games where he hasn't done great offensively, but his main strength is his defense.
Yeah, and I was very surprised with how he handled the trade and all that stuff. And it seems like the Dylan Brooks or not even trade, excuse me, but Dylan Brooks leaving.
It was a
Yeah.
sign and trade.
Yeah, so the Dylan Brooks leaving Memphis, I think that has aged very badly for Memphis. It seems like Brooks, they may have let him go prematurely, but that's probably a conversation for another day. So what was did you had another one, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess moving on, into some other stuff. I had a couple that I guess in a way, like, in terms of an update, right? Say like I think LaMelo Ball was one that I had,
Yeah.
and that was one where, right after I mentioned, like, where are you? You haven't really been playing all that well. Then
Yeah.
he started playing great. Where he had a stretch of games, where he was going on a tear.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, right, he got hurt, again, and that's kind of been, the issue for him so far in his career, where it's like, when he's on the court and he's playing well, he's a really special talent. But the problem is he hasn't been able to stay on the floor. Like I'm looking at some of these games, before the last game he got hurt, against Milwaukee, even though in fairness they got destroyed, right? He had 37 and 5, 34 and 9 against the Knicks, right? 36 and 8 against the Celtics, right? And that was a game they won. right? A game against Washington, he had 34 and 13.
Yep.
So, he was, in terms of the numbers this season, right? He's averaging just under 25 a game, 8 assists, a little over a steal. I guess a career high 44% from the field, which is still I think kind of low, but from three, 39%. So you'll take that. 86 from the line, 4 turnovers, which is not great, but I still feel like overall he was playing really, really well. But now he's hurt, so I guess in a way that kind of aged poorly. But I was kind of hoping and thinking that he was gonna play better. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I still think he's good. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't under the impression that he was like,
Yeah.
a bust or a
You were just
horrible
surprised that
player.
he was playing that badly because I think everybody who was watching him at that time during that stretch was like, "What the heck happened to this guy?"
Yeah, and then now it sucks because obviously Shams had said he had a bad ankle sprain and he's gonna miss a while, and he hasn't played since the 26th of November. So
Right.
I don't know how long he's gonna be out, but obviously he's not coming back anytime soon, and that hurt Charlotte as well because it seemed like maybe they might have started to figure some stuff out because
Mm-hmm.
once he was playing well, then your ceiling is just higher overall as a team, right? Because like then Rozier was on his way back, right? Bridges was on his way back, and he was playing well, so now Charlotte's back to kind of just being in a rut again where it's like, well, now we're probably going to have a tough time winning some of these games because, even though Rozier has been playing great, ideally you would like to have both of them just to have, a little bit more flexibility and stability at the guard spot because they don't really have a lot of other, like point guard type players on the roster that they can
Right.
really put out there, other than I guess Ish Smith, who's more like a throwback point guard.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, it is kind of unfortunate to see Charlotte be in the position they're in because, like you said, they were really turning it around, and then Melo got hurt, which is kind of the similar song and dance that has happened to Charlotte. And my final one, this one is kind of interesting. It was Cam Thomas. Unfortunately, same thing happened to him. He got hurt, but he was playing at a very high level, before his injury. And I think he's played 2 games since he was injured, I believe. So in those 2 games, he did put up 26 points on 52% from the field and then 40 from the three. And then in the most recent one, which I believe was yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, or the second, yeah, he had 20 points, but it was 30% from the field, 44 from the three. So that's kind of been the problem with him is the efficiency. But nonetheless, through I believe 10 games, I think he's only played 10 games this season, so it is a very small sample size. He is still averaging 26 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 46% from the field. So he is still scoring, and I think that's the only thing that he really can do at this point. I think he's just a pure scorer. But yeah, it was kind of unfortunate at the time because I think, he was on a tear at the time, but then, he got hurt, I think, like a week or 2 later after I had shouted him out for the take. So I mean, he came back and he's still kind of averaging the same amount of points. So I think it's aged okay. It's just, is it winning basketball? Who knows? But you can't really hate on the numbers.
Right, yeah, he'd been obviously playing very, very well, and
Yeah.
like you said, the main thing is that he's just come back, so it's like we don't really know necessarily what to make of it just
Right.
yet, because he's been out for a while, so he needs to get his legs back under him. But it definitely felt like before the injury that he had taken another step forward, especially with the efficiency, which is always good because if you're gonna be a guy that's mainly a scorer, ideally you want to do it in a way where you're really effective, right? You're efficient, you're taking you can take and make a lot of different types of shots at a high percentage. So that's what you like to see. So I feel like that was real, I guess. I
Yeah.
mean, at the same time, we'll see. Brooklyn is, kind of a bizarre team in the fact that, they've been, up and down. Um, but they do have, they don't really have like a ton of like crazy offensive players. They have some, right? Like Mikal Bridges, he's been solid. He just had a crazy game the other night, to end the Magic's 8-9 game winning streak where he had like 42. And
Yeah.
as a whole on the year, he's averaging 23, 6 and 4,
Not
48
bad.
from 36 from 3. So that's pretty good. So it seems like he's been able to kind of hold up offensively, as kind of like the go-to number one option. Right. And then after that, right, like guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, Lonnie Walker, so it's a weird team for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, but at the same time, like you said, Cam Thomas, I feel like we'll probably need to wait and see.
Yeah. I
But
need
at the
another
same
month.
time, he's playing so good that I don't necessarily feel like it was like completely fake. I mean, I know he was kind of doing that last season, but that was a stretch where that was late in the year, and the team had kind of, not that they had given up, obviously, but they just weren't as good. So they needed anybody.
Yeah.
But, now, they have a little bit more of of a feeling for what they have. But, obviously then they got hit with some bad stuff, right? Because Ben Simmons continues to be out and he's going to
Yep.
be out for longer because he had a, epidural injection in his back. So, and that hurts them. Um, just because, he's kind of got a little bit of an all around game. But at the same time, that's another thing where we were kind of wondering, hey, what does he look like going into this season? Where if he can kind of find a way back, to being what he was or somewhat close, then that helps Brooklyn. And it just
Sure.
hasn't been the case. So,
Yeah.
and it was kind of weird because I remember going into the season, I think you were all in on it. And I
Yeah.
was like still a little bit hesitant.
Yeah.
Because, but it just seems like for him it's mainly been the injuries, and it just
Yeah,
sucks.
unfortunately. Yeah, the injuries have hit him hard. And I wasn't really even taking that into account. I was more so thinking like play style and when he's on the floor he's gonna be pretty good, but it's been a little shaky.
But either way, Cam Thomas, I feel like that one's, I feel like, I guess, a little bit TBD, just
Yeah.
because again we just haven't seen a whole lot of him since he's come back from his injury. So I guess that will probably be another one we'll have to revisit.
Yeah.
Um, and then that another one that I had, that was kind of a rough one that I feel like, I guess, maybe has gotten a little bit better, but not necessarily, is Scoot Henderson, right? So, this was a guy where, obviously he came in with a lot of promise and he's just struggled. He just has not been good at all, really in any sense of the word. The last game he played, he was fine, right? I think they lost to the Jazz, if I'm not mistaken, in overtime, right? In the stat line, right? I guess it was at that point the best game he had played, 17
Right.
points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, still had 5 fouls, 6 of 15 from the field, 2 of 5 from three. But at the same time, that was his best game. And he had missed a decent stretch, with injury. I think he missed like 7, 8 games. So I'm not out on him obviously yet, because again, he's only played in 10 games. It's a small sample size. But I feel like what I have seen, it does feel kind of disappointing because it just seems like he looks kind of lost out there.
Mhm.
Uh, in the sense of, it just doesn't really seem like he's got a great idea of what he's got to really do. Um, but again, I'm still holding out that he'll still be an effective player. And it was kind of funny because I remember going into the draft, we both thought, even though we swapped the order in terms of who should take who, we both thought that Brandon Miller would be the better player coming out of the gate because it just felt like his skill set was going to be
Yep.
more ready, adaptable. Because again, the size, the skill at that forward spot,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's played out, about what we thought. Except
Sure.
he's definitely been a lot worse.
Yeah, I didn't
Scoot,
expect it to be this bad.
yeah, like I said, and I think we'll see. What happens. Now he's coming off the bench behind Malcolm Brogdon, which will probably help him. Um, just because Brogdon's more of a stabilizer, just because he's a vet.
Yeah.
Um, But either way, yeah, I hope it gets better because what we've seen hasn't been great. The shot he's been shooting awful, 34 from the field, 22 from three. A lot of turnovers, over 3 a game, and a lot of fouls, right? 4 fouls a game, which just to me is way too much for a guard. Like for a big, that's understandable just because of, what a big's role on defense is. But typically as a guard, unless you're like guarding the other team's best offensive player every possession, which he's not, like you just shouldn't be picking up that many fouls. So, hopefully he'll get it together. It's only 10 games, so it's a small sample size, but it definitely is something where it's like, I had that as a surprise and it's still held up because I feel like, even though he played better this game, so we'll see if he can kind of build off of it. Because just sometimes having one good performance or even like a half decent performance can help kind of, you
Sure.
know, start a streak. But this is definitely something to watch. This may be another kind of TBD one similar to Cam Thomas because we just haven't seen much of him. But it was something, to kind of, where it's like I've revisited it and it still doesn't feel great. But, obviously in the last game, it was still way better than before. Like 6 to 15 isn't great, but, the points, the rebounds, just the impact, it felt better. But, at the same time, it's got to be better. It can't be this bad.
Yeah, I mean,
Can't be.
the numbers right now are bust, but we're not going to label him a bust because it's been 1 year. But in regards to how he's played, like you said, he looks very confused. I think he looks lost in terms of what he needs to do, in terms of striking the balance between being a scorer or a facilitator, and sometimes even a defender. But sometimes you don't need to foul. Like you were saying, 4 fouls is way too excessive. Sometimes you literally don't need to foul. Take yourself out of the situation. And then with the assists and turnovers, yeah, It's freaking hideous. Like 4 assists and 3 turnovers. That's a horrible ratio in my opinion. And then the efficiency is down, way, way down. So I don't even know what to really say because this is not what I expected. And especially after seeing him in person at the summer league, I was like, okay, this guy seems like he has a great feel for the NBA. But that tells you the difference and shows you the difference in terms of who you're going up against. And I don't know, like, what the scouting report would be on Portland, where it's like, was Scoot the number one guy? On the scouting report. I doubt it. I would have probably thought it would have been, maybe like somebody like Simons, Aiton, or even, Shaden Sharp, because I think Shaden Sharp's been pretty decent.
Simons hasn't even played because he's been hurt, so I feel
Yeah,
like it's probably like a mix of like Jeremy Grant, Malcolm Brogdon,
there you
because
go.
those are the guys taking most of the shots.
Yeah.
Uh, for the most part, that
So,
have the ball in their hands. But it's definitely disappointing. But
yeah, it
I'm not
stinks.
ready to give up on him yet.
I'm
So
not giving up on him. It's just hard to talk about because, this is a guy that had a lot of promise. People were talking about him as a generational talent. Hopefully, it still holds up, but we'll see.
yeah. So now I guess we'll move into some of the newer ones. Just to kind of add to the list in terms of surprises.
Yes, sir.
Both good and bad, I guess. And then I'll start. I guess with mine, and that's Jaime Jaquez
Okay.
Jr. Right, so for the Miami Heat. Obviously, we've talked about him before. We were both pretty high on him going into the draft. We had him. I think we had him going like to similar spots. I think I had him like somewhere around like somewhere similar around like the Heat. I don't think I had him going to the Heat, but like somewhere in
Yeah.
that
I had
space.
him going to LA.
Yeah. So far this season, 12 points, 4 rebounds, 2.6 assists, over 50 from the field, 39 from three, and that's the key thing because in college he was kind of a low percentage 3-point shooter, but the fact that in the NBA he's been able to kind of get that going, while still being efficient and doing a lot of other stuff like playing in the post, attacking the basket, pull ups. He's got everything. In a way where it's like, obviously he's not a guy that's you're gonna go to like over the course of an entire game. But just the fact that he's another guy that's been able to like plug that you've been able to plug and play and fit in easily if you're the Heat, that speaks volumes about what the Heat are able to do in terms of the guys they have because they've continued to find ways to be able to get guys who to contribute, right? And this guy being able to do that as a rookie is pretty wild because again, like obviously Wemby and Chet have been the showstoppers in terms of how good they've been, but he's another guy where he's up there as like a top 5 rookie and also he's doing it on a solid team, right? Because usually like you don't normally see a lot of rookies that are like top 5, if they're on good teams, because normally like good teams aren't playing their rookies a whole lot. But
Mm-hmm.
and then some of it is also like the Heat have at times been forced to because they've had guys out, but also
Right.
at the same time he's produced. So even when they're fully healthy and have all their guys back, there's no reason for him not to continue to play. Because he's been that good. I mean, he's averaging 27 minutes a game. That's a lot.
Yeah, for a rookie,
Um,
yeah.
for a team that, typically has kind of had a lot more like veteran guys. But, still, you can't argue with the results because he's been there in a lot of their wins. He's been a big part of them and he's played great. And so I think, I thought he'd be a solid contributor. But, the fact that he's been this good, this quickly, like I said, that bodes well for the Heat. And you can kind of see why, like, they were hesitant, to kind of just throw him into trades because he's been very good.
Yeah. And, I watched him for, I think, all 4 of his years at UCLA. And it's like, his game was so interesting at UCLA. It was so different because I think he was such an undersized, post scorer where it's like, okay, maybe we don't know if this guy's game is going to translate. Maybe that's why he stayed all 4 years, whatever the case may be. But it's like, dang, like a lot of the haters were completely wrong because, like you said, he's shooting pretty good. Doing a lot of things defensively. He's a scrapper and he fits the Heat's culture perfectly. I think that's the key thing. And they seem to have found that kind of archetype of guys where it's like, yeah, we can just plug and play, fit in, and then you just do your job and we pay you pretty much. So it's like, none of the extra stuff. He's definitely a baller. And it's funny because I remember, I think he got dunked on in his rookie debut, I think. But ever since then, it's been all positive from him. So you love to see it. So I agree with that. I think that's
Hmm.
been a big surprise. Um, for my first surprise, this one's kind of more of like the recent ones in terms of the Orlando Magic. They're sitting at 14-6. I think a lot of people expected them to be good, but not second seed good in the East right now, or second in the East right now. They've been on a tear recently. They did just lose to Brooklyn, I believe, so that's unfortunate. So that snapped the 9-game winning streak, which was the longest winning streak active, I believe, in the NBA up until that point. Nonetheless, they are 9-1 in their last 10 games. They played great defensively. I think offensively is probably where the struggles have definitely seen some little bumps in the road, but I mean, you can't really hate on it. I think Franz has played very well. I think Paolo's played very well as well. So it's like, and Cole Anthony coming off the bench, we have a lot of praise for the Magic. I think we've talked about them maybe 3 episodes in a row and pretty much said the same thing. And they continue to hoop without, Markel Fultz and Wendell Carter Jr., 2 starters who I think have a great impact on this team because I think they're both great defenders as well. So you're missing some defense, but they're still one of the top teams in the NBA defensively. Rookie Anthony Black has played very well in terms of the intangibles and doing the things that don't show up in the stat sheet. I think we've even talked about a guy like Joe Ingles, where it's like, okay, what is this guy going to be able to do in his age coming off an injury? But it's like, I mean, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife where they put him anywhere and he just does whatever they need him to do. Gary Harris has played very well. Jalen Suggs, second coming of Josh Hart, love to see it. They just seem to have figured it out, and I think they were talking to Mo Wagner. And I think he said this was 3 years in the making. It's like, yeah, like this is more like 30 because they've been in a rebuild for so dang long. But, I do like to see them reaping the benefits. And it has been a surprise because I didn't expect them to be above Milwaukee and Philly, obviously, right now. But it is still early in the season. It's been 20 games for them. But right now, they're sitting, right under Boston at 14-6.
Yeah, and that's kind of the cool thing, about, how they've been so far. Because again, like you mentioned, it's really been behind the strength of their defense. They
Yeah.
have the third best defense in the NBA, in terms of defensive rating. Offense has definitely gotten better because it was in the bottom third. Now it's up to 18th.
Yep.
So you like to see that, right? Because if you can get closer and closer, to the upper teens, that's where you have like a really good team. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, there's probably a little bit of a ceiling. I mean, some of it's just dependent on, you know, if these young guys over the course of the season take a leap, because we talked about it, if they get into the playoffs and all of a sudden, one of Boncaro or Wagner kind of just figure it out in the
Yep.
playoffs, then that's where you have a scenario where like they could win a playoff series. If one of those guys turns it up and kind of turns into, like one of those, go-to guys. And they both have played very well, right? I think, Paolo had a little bit of a slow start to the season.
Yes.
Again, the first few games, it's such a small sample size, but now he's averaging 20 a game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 48 from the field, 44 from three. Not a ton of attempts, right? 3 attempts a game, but the fact that he's close to 50%, when he was in the low 40s last year, after just 1 year, that's really good. Um, Wagner over 20 a game, right? 6 rebounds, 3.5 assists. The 3 point percentage is down, right? 33%, but still 47 from the field. And again, like you said, you're just getting contributions from a number of other guys, right? Like you said, Jalen Suggs, having a career year, right? Because he had a slow start to his career,
Yeah.
where he had injuries and now he's healthy. He had a stretch where he was out, but still he's played 19 games. Um, and either way, you're getting great production out of him. His jump shot, has looked a lot better, right?
Mm-hmm.
37 from three. Cole Anthony, like you said, has been a spark plug off the bench. He's been great. And then, like you said, even though they've been down other guys, right? Like say Wendell Carter Jr., right? A guy like a Goga Batazde
Yeah, he's
a
been
Wagner
balling.
stepped in. Yeah, they've stepped in, and it hasn't been a problem. Like you said, Anthony Black stepping in for Markel Fultz, not a problem. Jonathan Isaac, right, coming off the bench, helping out mainly on the defensive end.
Yeah, that's a guy I
So
didn't even mention.
yeah, Gary Harris, being able to, provide them some outside shooting. And that's the thing, right? In terms of the 3 point shooting, how does that work, right? Because, on the year now they're 35% from three. So, they're now, they're now 20th in 3 point percentage. So that's good. Obviously it could be better, right? But, I think they were towards the bottom, earlier in the year. So if they can get that up, they are 10th in field goal percentage. So that's a good sign because we know obviously they do their damage inside the 3 point line. So that's their main thing. If they can find a way to either get some good shooting, some more good shooting, or maybe just some of their guys, start to shoot the ball a little bit better, that's where you could be, even more dangerous. But again, like you said, even some of these guys have been out. So when those guys come back, how do they, kind of fit those guys in as well?
Mm-hmm.
Like now, where do the minutes from those other guys go? Do they continue to play? And like you said, even a Joe Ingles, right? That was a guy where we were kind of confused by that signing. It seemed so strange just because it didn't seem like he did a whole lot for the Bucks. But now I guess a year removed from that other injury, he's healthy and he's playing great. Providing them, just a responsible adult, a veteran, to kind of help them out.
Yeah,
And
chaperone.
yeah, so there's a lot of positives I think from Orlando. They've definitely been, I think, the biggest surprise this season because we
Yeah.
definitely thought they'd be better. But like you said, for them to be towards the top of the Eastern Conference, I think was definitely a surprise. And like
for
you
sure.
said, it's still 20 games in, so there's potential for them to drop a little bit. But once you start getting to 20 games, that's starting to become, like a pretty significant sample size
Yeah,
where like
you're in
you're
deep.
starting yeah, where you're starting to feel like this could just be a sustainable thing where this might just be, a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. Cuz again, like, you look at the rest of the Eastern Conference and there's not like a whole lot of teams where I feel like they're just going to completely drop underneath. I mean, obviously it could change, but I feel like I still feel like they're better than Indiana. Brooklyn, Atlanta, they're definitely better than like that play-in group that we thought they would be in. It's just a matter of, are they still going to be by the end of the year better than Milwaukee? Are they going to be better than Philly? Are they going to be better than like, the Knicks? Where the Cavs kind of find a way to climb back in there. So there's definitely a chance for them to fall a little bit, but this definitely feels like a playoff team. Like I'm pretty confident that this team will be in the playoffs, unless like there's some type of bad luck where like one of those top teams just has a bunch of injuries and drops in there and then gets healthy. Like,
Right.
I think we thought that this was a play-in team, but like I said, I feel like now it's a playoff team.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, Moving on, I guess into another one of mine, because that was actually one that I shared with you.
Okay,
So
got you.
the next one I guess is Brandon Pajemski, right? So
Okay,
that was a guy that we liked coming out of the draft, right? He was a guy that we both I think projected to go to Golden State because it just seemed like he was a Golden State type of guy, and
literally.
he's not at all disappointed. He's played very well for them. Obviously, the stats don't look crazy, right? 7 points, 2 assists, but 4 rebounds, which is really good for a 6'5" guard. 46 from the field, 44 from three. He just looks very posed, very, very poised, very comfortable. Um, it's just a matter of, how many minutes is he actually going to play over the course of the season. I feel like
Hmm.
he's earned a spot in the rotation. But at the same time, because they have to manage the minutes of the vets and some of the other role players, how much is he going to play? Because he's been playing a little bit more now because guys have been out, right?
Right.
Like Paul's been out, Gary Payton's been out, even Wiggins has been out. So, the minutes are there right now, but at the same time, to me, he's played well enough where I feel like he should probably continue to play. Obviously, that adds another guard, so that doesn't really help you with your size problem. But just in general, like the young guys for the Warriors, like those are the guys where it feels like they need more minutes just because, of the fact that they do, because they're so, active and athletic, it just gives the Warriors a different feel. Not all of them, I think, personally, have played great. Like, I just think Kaminga's been too up and down. I know some people, don't want to give up on him. And I'm not saying he's like doomed or destined to be
Hmm.
bad. I just think he's just too up and down for, a guy who's in his third season. Um, Whereas, I think the rookies, Trace Jackson Davis hasn't played quite as much, but I think Pajemski, he's definitely been, I think, a surprise in terms of he's been really solid for them. Like I said, I don't know if he factors into their playoff rotation, just because again, I feel like this team generally just doesn't typically play their young guys like a ton in the playoffs. Just because again, they're relying on their core guys who are older. But either way, the fact that he's been good makes you feel good about, that draft pick. Because, again, I don't think people really question it because most people kind of felt like he was going to go there. So
Yeah.
maybe you might not consider it a surprise, but it's always, kind of like a shout out, when a guy who's not like a lottery pick, comes in and plays, really well, for a team where again, they desperately kind of need, some juice into that lineup because, they've been struggling. They've been going through it.
Yeah, and it's like I think the main thing that surprises me about him is more so his efficiency. I think, shooting 44% from the field in 14 games is pretty good in my opinion for a rookie. And then 45% from the field, albeit 7 points. But I think, he's one of those guys like Anthony Black where the intangibles, the stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. And when he's in, he makes the most of every minute that he's in there. So he makes it count. And you love to see that. I think he's got the grit, and I think that's something that's kind of underrated about the Warriors. I think their culture has been overshadowed by all this flashiness and all these stats, but they are some gritty guys. So I think he does fit into their culture perfectly. Like you said, it's just a matter of is he going to be a long term piece? Is he going to be a guy that contributes in the playoffs if they even make the playoffs? Um, but we'll see. So far, I've been thoroughly pleased with his play. Not to put a dampener on things, but yeah, we're gonna go negative on this one. My next one is Jordan Poole. He has been very, very bad. Career lows pretty much for everything. It's unfortunate. I think a lot of people thought that he was going to be a little bit better, or a lot better actually, than he has been recently. I don't really know what to say. I had him as an MIP candidate. That's gone down the drain. In 18 games, he's been averaging around 30 minutes, which I think is, kind of similar to what he had averaged in Golden State over the past 2 seasons. But from the field, I mean, this is almost as bad as his rookie year, and I think we know the rookie year was not very pretty for him. So he's shooting 40% from the field, really 39, and like a few days ago it was really 38. But the real kicker is 28 from the three. So he's jacking out there. It's not good. And even the free throw stuff kind of down because I think at one point he was Golden State's best free throw shooter, but he's shooting 85%, albeit he's not getting to the line as much as he used to. When you're in DC, you don't get the amount of calls that you do when you're a Warrior. But it's been bad, and the Wizards in general have just been bad. But I don't want to say Jordan Poole is the cause of that. I think the team in general is just very poorly constructed, no backup big man. But to stick with Poole, yeah, it hasn't looked good. And I don't even know if they're going to consider keeping him around for the franchise cornerstone. With all the comments that he said, all the stuff that's coming out, it's just not looking good for him. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. I don't want to harp on him too much because I think everybody in the world is pretty much piled on with the bad clips, the bad plays, the bad decisions. But yeah, I'll let you talk about him.
Yeah, I think it just kind of comes down to, ultimately, I feel like his ceiling was probably just not as high
Hmm.
as we may have thought. And it's kind of weird because I remember when he first came in the league and I saw him in preseason, and I kind of liked, what I saw in terms of like the confidence and the shot making
Hmm.
and just stuff he could do. But then as a rookie, like you said, he kind of stunk it up, and that was a year where the Warriors were bad.
Yeah,
So, it wasn't like, it was like, the worst thing that you've ever seen, but it also wasn't good at all because it was like, oh man, in a year where the Warriors are completely out of the equation, you'd like to see, some type of bright spot, and he was not one of them. And then, the following season, right, he was in the G League for a little bit. Um, then he came out of it and looked like a much more productive player. Obviously, they ended up being in the play-in and lost, but you felt like there was something to build off of, right? And then the title year, right? It looked like he had figured it out. He was starting while Clay was out, and he was having a career year, playing great. Shooting well from the field, shooting well from three, getting to the free throw line somewhat. And then he got paid, right? He got that contract, and it seems like it just hasn't been the same since, right? Like
hmm,
look, last year, the counting stats looked pretty similar. The scoring was up. Some of that was because guys were out. Like say Steph missed some time. Um,
started 43 games too. So
yeah, exactly. Played all 82, and then in the playoffs, obviously that's where it kind of definitely took a nosedive, right? In the playoffs, the title year, he averaged 17 and 4, and 50 from the field, 39 from three, right? He was great. And then last year went down to 10 points a game, 3.5 assists, and that was kind of definitely one of the fulcrum points where it was like, wow, the drop off, was so significant. That was definitely one of the things that hurt Golden State last year was you needed more out of him, and he just couldn't give it to you. Obviously, defensively he's not going to be there, but if he can give you great offense, that kind of makes up for it.
right,
In some spots, but and obviously, in Washington, it's also just a different vibe. When you're playing with less talent overall, right? Like the defenses are more keyed in on you. Um, you're a bigger part of the scouting report than you were before. And it's tough. And some guys are able to find ways to adjust and continue to play well, and then other guys it just doesn't look as good. And I
sure,
think also for the Wizards, just the lack of structure compared to Golden State, I think that doesn't help either, right?
yeah,
We've seen them in person, and it just, like even though they can score, it just doesn't look great, right? It
yeah,
just feels like, it's just kind of just a lot of, one on one, a lot of just freelancing. It doesn't really feel like there's any real process. And I think for some guys, it really hurts. Like you can see the difference between like, when guys are in situations where there's no structure versus like, when all of a sudden they're on a team where they have a little bit more, you know, I guess, things set for them, then
yeah,
they can kind of figure it out. Even like a guy like a Cam Reddish, right, where he looked like he might have been on his way out of the league, and then all of a sudden now he's starting for a Laker team and he's playing pretty well.
right,
So obviously, it's different for different guys, but like you said, you can't blame all the Wizards' failures on him. Obviously, he's not been very good.
yeah,
Mainly the efficiency has been awful. And that's I think, and that was kind of something where we've kind of cracked jokes where it's like, yeah, he might average like, a bajillion points a game, but like on low efficiency.
yeah,
But again, the points are down from last year, and the shots you would think would be a lot more available because the Wizards don't have the same level of offensive talent.
To be
Um,
fair, it has been 18 games for him, and it's just, but the thing that's really just annoying me and has surprised me is like all the talk of, him being a great worker, hard worker, all the work ethic stuff. It kind of just went out of the window when he did get that contract, but then it kind of started resurfacing when he did get traded, with all the stuff like this is, I'm so excited to have my own team. You heard the reports of him being like, Bilal Koulibaly's best friend at that point. So it's like, geez, I mean, like, what on earth happened? I don't know if it's like a coaching thing, if he just doesn't fit in the system. Or, like you said, there might just be no sense of direction, and that's, the cost of things. Because I don't really think the Wizards have a lot of players that, you can say a lot of positive things about, because I think everybody's numbers are kind of iffy, if you look at a certain total or something like that. But with Jordan Poole specifically, it's just hard to watch a guy who comes from a championship roster, just fall from grace like this, in my opinion.
right, and that's the tough part, say for the Warriors, where it's like, that's kind of I think why they made the calculus in terms of moving on from him.
Right.
Obviously, you had the chemistry issue as well, where you had the big punch,
Yeah.
event that happened with him and Draymond, so that didn't help either. But it is kind of rough because again, he was a guy again that I don't think they win the title without the way he played. And since then it just hasn't been as good, and
Yeah.
that's
It's been
kind of rough
horrible.
for a young guy you'd like to see, again, he's only 24, so you would think, he's got the opportunity, to get better. Obviously I didn't expect the efficiency to go up just
Right.
because
That wasn't the question. It's just a matter of the
yeah,
numbers and
but it's
everything. It's
yeah,
bad,
but
bro. 20s, the 20s from three? No.
yeah, like that's not great. And like I said, that's the rough part. And sometimes that's kind of where you give credit to the superstars, where like again, those guys can make guys better, right?
Yeah.
Like he's able to play off of a guy like a Steph, and he's able to play within a system that's very structured and organized. But
Sure.
now on the Wizards, right? The guy, the best guy on the team, right? I guess is Kyle Kuzma,
Yeah.
right?
At
He's
this
just
point,
even
yeah.
though he's a solid player, right? He's not in the same class as like a superstar. And then obviously you're going from, a very structured system in Golden State, even though people now have more questions about Steve Kerr, to now you're going to a team in Washington where it's like they have no structure, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, Wes Unseld Jr. So the combination of less talent with less structure, and also just like you said, uninspired play, bad decision making, some of the negatives, that people complained about even while he was a Warrior, right? When they
In
were
his
winning.
first year. Because I remember people were talking about, this was an overdraft. And it's like, I thought it was an overdraft too when they did pick him up in that draft. But like, I think, because I remember like watching him and being like, I think I remember even texting you and being like, yeah, he's going to be like a guy to watch. Like, he's going to be legit. Like, keep your eyes on him. And like, it's just crazy to see, the circle. Everything's come full circle. And it's like, now we're back to square one. And that's just not what I wanted to see. So it's been surprising and really disappointing.
Yeah, because that's the rough part. Because again, it seemed like he had figured stuff out the championship year. And even then, like you still had some people that were wondering, like, is this real?
Right.
But now it seems like
It's
it may.
fake,
I don't
bro.
want to say like fluky, but like
It's
I
phony.
mean, like we've seen in the playoffs, and I don't want to like you said, I don't want to harp on him because again, they
Yeah,
don't win the title without him. But
for
at this
sure they
point,
don't.
it does kind of almost feel like that their championship run may have been a little bit. Like I said,
They were just hot.
I don't want to say fluky. I don't want to say phony. But given what's transpired since then, it feels like everything just kind of lined up in
I
a
think they were
positive.
just hot.
Yeah, where you got, and again, that happens in the playoffs where you
Yeah.
have guys that have crazy performances where it's like, wow, where did that come from? Even like every year, like it happens. Like even the Lakers last year, right? Where like, Rui, got crazy hot, like
Yeah.
you had the crazy Lonnie Walker game. Again, we've seen it every year, teams that win titles or teams that, go further than we expect. Like again, it happens where
Yeah.
you have a couple of guys, that all of a sudden come out of nowhere and do just insane things. Like I remember, I think it was Houston in 2015, right, where they were down 3-1, and they had that crazy comeback where they were down huge, and it was like Josh Smith, and I can't remember the other dude who helped lead the comeback. It was
Hmm.
Josh Smith and somebody. I don't know why I'm
Jeez,
forgetting.
that's a throwback, man.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't even like Harden, because Harden he was benched during that comeback,
Right.
right? So it was Corey Brewer. That's who it was.
Oh
It was like Corey
gosh,
Brewer and Josh Smith,
Mr.
and they got
51.
crazy hot and let it come back. And sometimes things like that happen. It's just or I mean like where guys get hot and they can completely change the course of a series.
Yeah.
And it seems like, hopefully Poole can kind of turn it around because, again, he's on a huge contract. So it's not like he's in danger of being out of the league or anything. But that's where you hope, like, if the Wizards can get more talent, maybe if they can, for a couple of years get some high picks and draft well, that's where it's like, okay, well, now maybe he'll be in a position where, like,
Right.
he's going to have to monopolize the offense. And then he can kind of go back to sort of being more like like a second, third guy
System
where,
player.
yeah. Yeah, where you can where he can play a little bit more within the offense as
Right.
opposed to completely running the offense to him. Like you said, it's definitely been disappointing. We'll see because again,
Yeah.
young guys they're up and down, and like you said, it's tough for a guy who's already been a part of a championship team. But you know, again, they traded him, I think, for a reason, and some of that, in fairness, was the CBA stuff, and then some of that was also, I think, they were just disappointed in his play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Next up, in terms of another surprise, right? Obviously, we had already mentioned the Magic, so I'm gonna pick a different one, and this one is also more of a negative, and this is a team, and this is the Detroit Pistons.
Okay.
This was a team that going into the season, we liked what they did in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we thought that they'd be a playoff team or anything crazy like that,
Nope.
but we definitely thought they'd be better. At
Mm-hmm.
least maybe have a chance to push for a play. And I think that was kind of like high end, but but I thought they'd be definitely better than what they were, right? Like I thought they might be like, I don't know, 12th or maybe 11th or something like that.
Yeah.
But they've been the worst team in the NBA, right? I mean, like, the Wizards and them were kind of going back and forth, but the Wizards beat Detroit, and
Yep.
they're, I think, record wise, they are once again, like last year, the worst team in the NBA. But unlike last year, they have more talent, right? Like Cade Cunningham missed a ton of time last year, but he's played in, I think, pretty much every game. They're 2-18. Yeah, he's played in all 20 games. He's been very up and down, so that's kind of disappointing. Um, Jalen Duren has missed some time. I mean, in the minutes he's played pretty well. He just fouls a lot. Asor Thompson has definitely been a bright spot. That was a guy that we liked in the draft, and
Yeah, for sure.
it's weird because in the last couple of games he's been coming off the bench, and I don't really know why. I don't know if it's like an injury or if it's just them changing the lineup around.
Yeah.
Um, Bogdanovich was out, so obviously that hurt, because he was a guy that played pretty well last year. But it's just been such a weird team, and I just don't really understand what is going on here because, again, I feel like they have some talent. Some of it is a weird fit. Like, I think Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren together just seems kind of weird, where it's like they're both really centers. I know Stewart can kind of shoot, but, like, just in general, it feels like one of them should start and the other should probably just be the backup. Um, and then you have, Cunningham and Ivy, and Killian Hayes, right? They've had lineups where all three of them have been together, which is kind of interesting. And then I think that's why Asor Thompson was coming off the bench. But still, it just doesn't feel like there's a direction. I mean, they started off winning the first two games of the season, and I think we talked about like, oh wow, Detroit looks pretty solid. But
Yeah.
since then, they've lost what, like 18 in a row.
Yeah.
It went the entire month of November without winning a single
They're
game.
2-18 right now.
Yeah, exactly. They're 24th in defense. They're 29th in offense. They have a horrible net rating of 9. I mean, it's all bad. Like, I mean, it's really disappointing because at the very least, like, it's kind of like similar to the Spurs, I guess, as well, where it's like, I kind of, even though I knew they weren't going to be that great, I thought they would at least be kind of entertaining. I mean, I guess the Spurs have Wembanyama, but like even then, like there are games where like for the Spurs it's hard to watch, but with Detroit, it's awful to watch. Like
Yeah.
I mean, like I watched them when I mentioned this before where I watched them play against the Lakers and like it was just it didn't even it felt like a G League team. It just and again, like there's some talent on the roster, but it's just awful. And like I mean, I don't really know a whole lot in terms of what to say because again, I like some of the players on the team. Um, and some of the young players I think have bright futures, but it's bad fits. To me, the coaching has been pretty mediocre. It just doesn't seem like they have any clue what to do. The front office, even though they, I think, got a lot of praise the last couple of years, it's starting to feel like maybe they need to start taking some heat, them and the ownership, because I think there's just like some guys that don't fit well together, um, and it's hurting everybody. So I think at a certain point they just kind of need to pick a direction, and they need to start kind of figuring out like which guys we need to move and which guys we should keep. There's also some veterans on the roster. Some of them have not played. I don't think Joe Harris has played at all, and that was a pickup that I think we thought was fine just because he's a decent shooter, and this is not a playoff team, so you're not worried about a playoff drop off. But that's what I'm hoping at the very least by the trade deadline they'll just kind of move some of the vets and then just kind of go in all in on the young guys because it definitely feels like a lost season, which sucks. Because again, I think that there's a decent amount of talent, and for Detroit, it's been awful basketball like for a while now. I mean, they've had like this might be the worst stretch of Detroit basketball like ever. I mean,
I mean,
I'd
they've
have
been
to
bad since like the late 2000s, right?
yeah, I mean, they had the championship in 2004,
Right.
back-to-back finals appearances then in 2005. And then they had stretches, they still had a few years where they were towards the top of the East. And then a few years ago, right, they had that random resurgence where it was Blake Griffin and Andre
I
Drummond.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was okay. But, since then, like the last few years, it's been all bad. And they've, again, like, last year they had bad luck where like they were the worst team and didn't get the number one pick. They did get a Stuart Thompson, so that's, I guess, kind of a nice like I guess
Consolation prize. Yeah.
consolation prize, which is good. But other than that, like I don't know what to say. It's been disappointing because, like I said, I didn't expect them to be good. My expectations were low, but just goodness, like this is bad. Like, and
Yeah.
I don't know, what the next step is. I just feel like, again, like some of these guys are just they're gonna have to figure out something because to me this is kind of unacceptable. Because they should at the very least, even if they're bad, be at least entertaining. But this is not entertaining. This is a train wreck.
Yeah, they suck. Simple as that. That's all I really have to say about it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But in general, it's hard to watch. I've only watched one of their games, and it was against the Wizards, and I thought we were for sure gonna lose that game. But the Wizards won that game, which was a surprise to me. But yeah, I think Detroit, being this bad is definitely a surprise. Sitting at 2-18, it's horrible. Looking at the guys they have on the team, a guy like Cade Cunningham, you kind of expect him to carry the load a little bit. I would say, not like to the point where they're a play-in team or even like top of the East or anything like that. But at least, 5 or 6 wins by now. 2 is unacceptable in my opinion with a guy like Cade Cunningham. Maybe that guy doesn't pan out. Who knows? He may not be the guy. Simple as that. They might have just messed up. But I think he'll be the guy. But in general, the talent fits. It seems like the talent hasn't really translated to the court. On paper, it looks like, yeah, okay, this is a promising young team. But on the court, it looks like they have no sense of direction, no sense of offense, definitely no defense. So I don't really know what to even say. Some questionable choices. I think, the handling between Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey, that whole debacle, I think, that's been weird. I think you should probably just move on from Killian Hayes. He's been around in the league a little bit longer than Jaden Ivey, and I think we all can admit that Jaden Ivey is probably better than Killian Hayes. So I think that's somebody that you need to move on from. Monte Morris, didn't really understand that pickup, but I don't even think he's played a game for them. I don't know.
Played it all.
Exactly. So that doesn't help. James Wiseman, we've already talked about Detroit multiple times, and it's kind of just the same song. It's just nasty. Duren, I guess, is okay, but they just don't look like they're a team. Like there's no sense of chemistry, no direction, no offensive scheme, and it's like, yeah, Cade is averaging like 22 points, but it's not pretty.
Yeah,
I mean, it's on 41%, bro.
yeah, it's like who cares? Like,
Like,
I mean, they're
yeah,
2-8. Like, at least with the Wizards, at least the saving grace you can say for them is that this is year one of a rebuild. So
sure,
your starting point is not that great, anyways,
right.
right? Like, because you're kind of just like you have some holdovers from before, mixed with like some other guys coming in where you're like, you don't know what they're really gonna be.
Yeah, they
But with
moved on
Detroit,
from everything.
yeah, but with Detroit, they've been bad for a while. Like in theory, they should have already picked up a couple of building blocks, and they're still
Legit.
horrible. You'd like to see that's where, like with Detroit, you should see some type of improvement. Like you said, at least could we get to 5 or 6 wins?
Yeah, man,
Like,
like
I
5,
feel,
bro. That's all I ask is 5.
yeah, it is wild because you kind of going into the season, even though we liked the offseason, it didn't seem you were not very high on Detroit. Where I think you thought that the Wizards would be better than Detroit. And again,
I
I
did.
guess in fairness, they haven't been much better,
No,
but at
it's
the same time, like Detroit's been, just like I said, abysmal. And like you said, there's not a whole lot more to say that we haven't already said. It's just again, it just continues to amaze me how
yeah.
awful it really is.
Yeah,
Because
I didn't
again,
think it could get much worse for them though, to be fair.
yeah, because like once you watch it, then you're just like, that's where it's all of a sudden you're just like scratching your head because
Yeah.
like you hear a team that's like 2-18, you're just like, oh, it's like, oh, well, yeah, that's horrible. But then when you actually see it and watch it, I'm sure it's even worse in person. But like
Yeah, I
it's just
bet.
bad. And like I said, it's unfortunate because again, like I thought they'd be better. I get that it definitely has hurt, like you said, a guy like a Monte Morris or, as I mentioned, a Joe Harris or a Bogdanovich. Those guys haven't played, but you would still think like overall the team would be mainly lifted by the young guys because that's kind of like your future building blocks. But
Yeah.
now it feels like there's definitely even more questions for Detroit than we might have thought going into the season because it's pretty bad.
Yeah. Moving on, I have an interesting take here, and it's unfortunately negative. This is my last negative, but it's the Clippers. Yeah, they have stunk it up in my opinion. Definitely not the kind of team that I envisioned coming into this season. I know coming into this season, I had talked about Paul George seemingly being, the healthiest he's ever been. It seemed like he was going to be on a tear, and that seemed to be the case. I think Russ, Kawhi, and PG were playing, very good basketball together, and then Harden came along, and everything kind of just went down the train. And it's like, okay, I know, in the last 10 games they have played better. They are 6-4. They just recently won a game, but they're still sitting at 9-10. And I think that's a hole that they can't really afford to be climbing out of at this point. Looking around in the West, you've got Minnesota, OKC, Denver, Sacramento, Phoenix, Dallas, Lakers, even the Pelicans are above you. So I just think the Clippers are too good in terms of the front end talent to be that low, sitting at number 9. But to be fair, they are playing better recently, but it's just surprising, considering that, especially since Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have been very healthy recently.
Yeah.
That's just not supposed to happen. The big thing was, they're going to lose all the games without Kawhi and Paul George, but that hadn't really been the case. And, I'm sure, once Harden gets acclimated, they'll be better, but it still is surprising. And I'm not sure if that was the trade that they needed to make. Because, I mean, did they really need James Harden? Really? I don't think so. But I'll let you talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is like you said. You look at the last few games and it's been better. Like you said, 6-4 in their last 10. And I think some of it that definitely doesn't help is like when they've, in some of the losses when they've lost, they've been like really bad, right?
Hmm.
Like they had the game against the Nuggets, right, where no Jamal Murray, no Jokic, not even an Aaron Gordon,
Yeah.
and they lost, right? They lost, relatively
Was that the
sound.
DeAndre Jordan crazy
Yeah, that was
game? Yeah. Okay.
the Reggie Jackson game, right? And
Gotcha.
it feels like a lot of the games they've kind of lost in similar ways, right? They had back-to-back games against Golden State, right? One of them was on the second night of a back-to-back, and they lost. They made a comeback at the end, but it just wasn't enough. And then in the second game, yeah, they did win. They pulled it out. They were getting blown out in that game initially, so it kind of felt, similar to what the issues were all over again. Right then they came back, and Paul George hit that game-winning three. I don't know. Like you said, it is interesting because Paul George and Kawhi have played every game. I definitely feel like the record should be better. And it is strange because again, like you look at the schedule and schedule-wise, right? Like they had a stretch where like they had like I think a number of relatively like easy matchups, right? Like there was a stretch I think where like half their wins were against the Spurs, right? And like I said, now it's been better, right? They got a big win over Dallas, and then obviously the big win over the Kings and the Warriors. So the question I guess now is like, once they get to, the tougher stretch, that's where I think we'll kind of see like, whether or not they have what it takes. And I think like with Kawhi, that was also kind of the disappointing part where, he had a stretch earlier in the season where he wasn't really looking that good. And he's been way better as of late. And I feel like, we said Paul George has been the best Clipper this year, but I think in order for them to be as good as they can be, Kawhi has to be the best one. And
For
he
sure.
can't just be the best one. He needs to be like a top, 7-ish, somewhere around that player.
I would even
Like
go as far to say top 5.
top five. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think top five for sure. Like he was last year, when we saw him in the playoffs.
Yeah. We need
Um,
Toronto Kawhi back, really, though.
yeah, and if he can get there, that's where I think the Clippers could potentially take off, and you could see, more of the positives because there are some things right where it's like you can see the rapport with Harden and the bigs and the pick and roll. Westbrook comes off the bench and they pair him with Tice, because Tice is more of a floor spacer than
Hmm.
Zubac. Um, and they kind of have to figure out, how many non-shooters can we put out there at one time? Because, now they have a couple of those guys. One of them is Westbrook, one of them is Zubac. So you kind of have to figure out some of that stuff. Terrence Mann, like the starting five, I think in terms of their net rating has been pretty good. It's just again the bench they kind of need to figure out some of that stuff. It feels like a little bit. It feels like there's a little bit too much duplication. With Westbrook and Norman Powell. Not that they're the same player, but I feel like you only really need one of those guys. You
Yeah.
know, and then the other one you could probably turn into something else because they don't really. And that's the thing where I feel like that's probably where like they'll need to make one more move. Um, and it's probably going to have to be one of either Norman Powell or Terrence Mann because they don't have much left to trade. I guess you could, put Bones in there as a throw-in. His
It's
contract
got
is
to
so
be Powell. You got to keep Terrence Mann, in my opinion.
yeah. So that's the thing. Where I feel like that's probably where like they need another piece because I just feel like they need another guy, that they can kind of put out there to come off the bench. That's not just like another guard.
Yeah.
Maybe like another wing or forward or something. So that way, like you could have one of Kawhi out there with a wing, and or like another one of Paul George out there with a, something like that. Like they had before the Harden trade, and that's where I think you might see a better version of it. It's definitely been record wise a disappointment. Like you said, they've been better as of late. With some bad losses sprinkled in there. So I think that's where like a lot of the negativity stems from. But
Yeah.
like you said, it also feels like some of these other teams have dealt with more injuries where, like you said, a team, like the Pelicans, right? Like there's guys that have been healthy, but they have missed a few games here and there, and their record is better. And then again, you look at a team like, I don't know, like a Dallas, or like you said, the Lakers, their stars have played, but they've had a number of bench guys out.
Right.
Kind of the thing where you just feel like the record should be, or look at the Suns, right? That's another great example where they're a top 5 seed right now, and they have not had a single game of all 3 of their guys. So
Nope.
like that's where like if you're the Clippers, you got to be disappointed where you are. They are ninth, so obviously there's a chance to move up. But ideally, if you're the Clippers, you would like to avoid the play-in and definitely avoid like the 9-10 area of the play-in because that's a
Yeah.
scenario where you lose one time and you're completely
You're
done.
done.
Don't necessarily know if this is the team where we can just automatically say like they can fight through adversity because we just haven't seen it.
Yeah. They don't have that dog in them right now.
So I mean, again, I feel like they'll be better, but again, is the ceiling legitimately a championship team? I just don't know. Like I'd have to
Yeah.
see a little bit more of them. But I do think at the very least, it's good to see that they've kind of gotten out of the weird clunky start. Because part of that bad record was also precipitated by them losing what was it like 6, 7 straight games in a
Yeah.
row. And like you said, now they're 6-4 in their last 10 games, and that might be a little bit more instructive in terms of what they actually are. Because
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't feel like this is a bad team,
No,
but
they're not supposed to be. That's why it's surprising that that's where they are.
yeah. But at the same time, like maybe they're just okay. Like what
That's unacceptable though. With the guys on the roster though, in my opinion, that's just
yeah,
unacceptable.
like Paul George. I know he mentioned we got a gutsy win over the Warriors where like we were down by like 20 whatever. But also I'm like I don't think the Warriors are that good either. And also
No, the
like
Warriors suck this year.
and also in fairness to them, they had guys out. So it's like I mean, yeah, you feel good about a win, but you were getting blown out to a Golden State team that was missing a few guys. So
Exactly.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if they pick it up because again, there's still the chance that they could go on a run, a win streak, and one of these other teams may just kind of fall off after a hot start. But I don't know. It like you said, Kawhi and Paul George have played every game, and you're below 500, and you haven't had the hardest schedule. That's definitely not like great.
Yeah,
But
it's
I do
surprising.
think it's been a little bit better. But overall, it does feel kind of a like it does. It definitely does feel like a disappointment.
Yeah.
And then my last one. This is another negative one. So unfortunately, we're going in a string of negatives, and I think this one is the Cavs.
Ooh, okay.
To me,
I thought about doing them.
yeah, they've definitely been, I think, a little bit of a negative. I mean, they are 11-9, so that's not bad, but they are eighth in the Eastern Conference. Now, I will say, in fairness to them, they've had some bad luck in terms of injuries. They've had some of these guys out, for stretches, right? Like Donovan Mitchell, has missed like 5 games, 5 or 6 games. Darius Garland's missed like 5 or 6 games. Same with Jared Allen. So that, there's some context that needs to be put in there as well. But even then, you mix in some weird games. Like they had a game where they lost to the Blazers, right? And the Blazers are not exactly a great team, and they're down multiple guys as well.
Yeah.
So it just kind of feels like some of the concerns that we had with some of the fits on the roster, like with Mobley and Allen, where it's like, Allen, or, with Mobley, it seems like he's just not going to be a good outside shooter. And if he can't really shoot that well in terms of having a consistent jumper, that's where the fit's going to be a lot more problematic because we know what Jared Allen is already, right? I feel like he's probably capped out in terms of what he is
Yeah.
as a player, which is not a bad player.
Mm-mm.
But when he's next to another guy who doesn't space the floor, then that hurts both of them, and that hurts the team as a whole. Max Strus, I think he's played pretty well, helping to fill the void in terms of some 3-point shooting. Um, Garland, I think, his year has been kind of mixed. His 3-point shooting's not been as great. He's turned the ball over a lot more. He's averaging over 4 a game,
Mm-hmm.
6 assists. So I think that needs to be shored up. And maybe like also you might just say like there's also like somewhat of a ceiling when you have two smaller guards that aren't great defenders. But they were also really good last year despite not really having a lot of shooting. Um, so I don't know. They could get better, but as of right now, even though the record isn't that bad, I still feel like it's a little bit of a disappointment. I guess in fairness, I would like to see more games with all their guys. I mean, they haven't missed a ton of time, but again, 6 out of 20 games, that's about a third of the season. So that's, for the small sample size we have, that's a decent amount of time. But I don't know. It doesn't feel like they're as good as last year, which I thought they'd be a little bit better because I liked some of the signings they had, and I think that those guys have played well, but it still kind of feels like that it's a team that's still lacking something.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and maybe they make a move at the deadline. The coaching wise, we'll see. I mean, I don't think he's been the biggest issue. He has Bickerstaff hasn't been great, but I still feel like the roster as a whole just feels like there's just some flaws in terms of like your bigs don't shoot that well, your guards are small. You're just gonna have somewhat of a ceiling, and some of it's gonna have to kind of work itself out at some point, or else they could be in a similar spot to last year where they end up losing in the first round again. Because if you're one of the lower seeds, that means you have to play one of the best teams in the first round, right? Like I don't think you want to be matched up against like the Celtics in the first round. I don't think that's an ideal matchup for Cleveland. To right there, in the first round. So
Yeah.
hopefully they get better, but as of right now, it's definitely a disappointment for.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with them, is their shooting for sure. It's not like they have a lot of guys that are shooting the three ball efficiently, excuse me. Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, I think they're not really shooting the three ball that efficiently. Obviously, like you said, Mobley, definitely not. Levert, no. And then like Struce, yeah, for sure. He's shooting almost, 40%, which is really good. And then Craig Porter in the limited games that he's played, 42. So there are some guys that are able to hit the three, but it's not enough, and especially not, with your starters. So I think that's the biggest problem with them. And they've been definitely disappointing, I think, for sure. Because I think, this was a team where we thought they could bounce back after getting eliminated so horribly in the playoffs last year. And, you want to see another leap from Garland. You want to see the consistency with Donovan Mitchell. But like you said, they've missed a few games. I don't think it's enough to the point where it's like it hurts their stats like a crazy amount. I think this is kind of like the versions that they've been playing, the versions that have been playing this season. So that's the problem with me. I think it's a mix of defense and just horrible 3-point shooting, and that might just be a recipe for disaster. Hopefully they can figure it out because I am very high on the Cleveland team. It's just really
Yeah.
unfortunate what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, defensive rating they're ninth, so that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But offensive rating they're 22nd. That's
Yeah,
the
it's
part
just
where
tough. It's
not right.
inefficient.
26th in 3-point percentage at 34%, so that's pretty bad. And like you said, some of the guys that you're kind of hoping to shoot well on threes, like Garland and Mitchell, have both, like you said, shot poorly from three. And if that gets better, right, then that will obviously help somewhat.
And they
Um,
both can't defend. That's what I was talking about when I meant like defensively. I know they're like a good defensive team, but when you have two
right.
guys that just get bullied, wherever they are, because I think Donovan Mitchell's more of a willing defender than Garland, but still not great. It's not like they put 100% effort on defense every night. So
Yeah, and due to his, even though he's small, he is athletic and he's,
sure,
pretty strong and sturdy for a guy his size. So that helps him. But like you said, sometimes there's also just a limit to how good can you be defensively when you're
yeah,
like, under 6'4".
yeah,
So I mean, yeah, like that's the thing where it feels like maybe they might have to at some point probably just break up that big man
yeah,
tandem. And also you just kind of wonder, right? Like what do they do with Mitchell? Because again, you don't have to answer that question now, but you gave up a decent amount in order to get him. And I feel like you'd like to do a little bit better than a first round exit, to,
big time, yeah,
a lower seed, so if they can get to the second round, obviously that would be pretty ideal. I don't know if they'll get there. I mean, I feel like I need to see better production first, right? Because I don't, I mean, we saw an eighth seed get to the finals, but I don't think that should just be expected every year.
right,
Um, and I don't know if this would be the team to do it, just because they don't have the same level of experience together. So, um, I don't know. Like I said, it's been disappointing. So I'd like to see a little bit better production. And I feel like the guards can probably play better. Like I just feel like Garland and Mitchell can both, play better, in terms of efficiency and, Garland in terms of the turnovers. And I think that will probably help. But I still don't necessarily know like if the ceiling is as high as you would like it to be. Because I still feel like with Mobley and Allen, you just have a problem where it's like neither guy shoots jumpers really well at all. Like you're not worried about them at all from the perimeter. And
yeah.
if that's just going to be what it is, then yeah, that's going to be a problem. And again, like I said, I liked some of the signings with Strus and Niang. They've helped kind of shore up some of the perimeter issues, but you're still a bad 3-point shooting team. They're still 26th and three,
Yeah,
right? So like, clearly, whatever they did, it still hasn't really helped that much. So
exactly.
that's the thing that's definitely a disappointment. So maybe a trade will happen of one of those other role guys, because I don't think they're gonna do like a big deal like that, like where Allen is gone. I don't think that's gonna happen right now. Maybe it might, but I think as of right now, they're gonna just try to see like, hey, let's see what it looks like when we have like a stretch of games where all of our guys are playing, and hopefully maybe we'll just play better
Yeah.
and then go from there. And like if they take off and they look, closer to where they were last year, then that's good. But, as of right now, I'm kind of, keeping an eye on them just because I feel like it should be better. And so far, it hasn't been. Like I said, the record isn't terrible, but eighth in the East to me is not ideal.
No,
And
they
again,
should be a
with
top
injuries,
5 seed, I think.
yeah, and then the issue with injuries is like, well, Orlando's been missing guys and they've still found ways to win. Now you could say they have more depth, and that's definitely a factor as well. And that kind of is what happens when you have like a roster where you have some guys that are being paid a lot of money at the top, right? Like a Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. Allen's making a decent amount, so obviously that matters as well. But again, I hope they can turn it around because again, it hasn't been great, and there have been stretches where I think it's been cool, but again, you're barely above 500, and you're eighth in the Eastern Conference. So like I don't think they should be in that mix. I think they should be in that top five mix.
Yeah. And I think I've got two more, but I think it was because we shared the Orlando Magic, I think. Um, So for my second to last one, this one I think kind of goes without saying. De'Aaron Fox. He's been surprising. I don't think a lot of people expect him to take the leap that he's taken this year, although it has been 13 games. He is shooting 48% from the field, which is down from last year, but I think that's partly due to the fact that he's taking more threes and making more threes. So, he's shooting 37% from three on 8 attempts, which is very good. I think that's something that his game had been lacking previously. He'd always been in the low 30s pretty much. And even sometimes below, sometimes only getting to 29%. But, last season he did shoot 32, but it is up to 37. Like I said, it's been 13 games, but he's also been taking care of the ball very well. Career low for turnovers, which is always a positive. And then, he's averaging 6 assists. And then 30 points. That's the big thing. He's fourth in the league in scoring, I believe. Like I said, gonna have to keep saying that about all of his stats. 13 games. But regardless, I think he's put the Kings in a good spot. I'm not too high on them per se, but I am very high on De'Aaron Fox. If that makes any kind of sense, I'm very high on him. But the team in general, I think, has a big ceiling, and I think he does contribute to lowering and raising their ceiling depending on how he plays and how efficient he is, especially from downtown. Because we already know he can get downhill easily. Nobody can really stick with him, but. In general, I think the Kings are in an interesting spot where it's like they're a team to watch. I would consider them frauds right now, but regardless, you can't take away the fact that De'Aaron Fox is playing out of his mind.
So, I mean, again, like you said, you look at the Kings, they're fourth in the Western Conference,
Yeah.
they're 11 and 7. Offensively, they're 14th, right? So obviously, that's a step back from where they were last year when they were, I think a top 5 offense. Defensively, they're 19th, right? Which is still not great, but it's better than what it was last year where I think they were a bottom 5 defense. So, obviously you look at the leap, and that was kind of what we talked about going into the offseason, where because they didn't really make a lot of moves in the offseason. I mean, they brought some guys back, right? They, brought back Harrison Barnes. I think they brought back Alex Len.
Yeah.
They brought in, I guess, a couple of guys like JaVale McGee, Sasha Vezenkov. And I think, who else did they bring in? I think they brought in Chris Duarte, right? Yeah, from Indiana. So they didn't make like any real major moves. So you didn't really expect them to be much better in terms of the roster. It was more so about what do the guys that are the young guys on the team look like going into the next
Yeah.
season. And we said, like, if a guy like a De'Aaron Fox or like a Keegan Murray or somebody like that were to take a leap, right, that's where, you might be able to have a chance. Or you will have a chance, in these series. Because, I mean, last year went 7 games. I mean, it was an upset. But at the same time, it's not the same upset as you would normally think because nobody really picked the Kings to win that series, other than
Right.
like maybe a handful of people. The Warriors were like the massive favorites in that
Yeah.
series, and it went longer than we expected. And part of the reason why it went as far as it expected was because De'Aaron Fox was great. Um,
Exactly.
get a better version of De'Aaron Fox than you got last year, then maybe all of a sudden that series flips. Where like now if he's the guy that could be the best player on the floor in a series, that's where you have a chance to win. And there's gonna be some matchups where I think like if the Kings go against like another young team, where I think they might actually be able to have a chance to kind of maybe pull off an upset. I think some of these other teams that have a little bit more experience, it may be a little bit more difficult. But at the same time, it would be interesting, because like right now, they're the 4 seed. They would be matched up against the Suns, and I'd be very curious to see what that even really looks like. Because you look at the Suns, and like we haven't even seen all their guys together,
Right.
but still able to score effectively. But you just kind of wondered, like at the same time, like the Kings can also score, but which team would have a higher defensive ceiling? I'm not necessarily sure. You think it may be the Suns only because like I feel like there are some guys that like are better individual defenders, like maybe like a Durant, maybe a Nurkic, or an Akogi or somebody like that. But then at the same time, like which guy are you putting on, De'Aaron Fox if you're the Suns? Like, I mean, I'm not sure. Like that would be an interesting matchup. Um, but at
Yeah, I
the
agree.
same time, yeah. But then there's other matchups where I I don't know if I feel as good about them. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of depends. I think, and that's kind of where we are in the league now. And we've said it multiple times. Where like it's a lot more matchup dependent now. Where if you're a team and you have a favorable matchup, you're gonna have a really good chance to win. It's not like before where like in the first round, teams were like just wildly better than the other one. Because again, we had a lot of upsets in the playoffs last year, and some of it, yeah, some of it was kind of due to some teams having some injuries, but at the same time some of it was also just these teams were a lot closer than you would have thought, right? Like say the Heat, were on the verge of sweeping the Celtics as an 8 seed, and the Celtics were, I think, the 2 seed.
Yeah.
Um, and that wasn't like a scenario where I mean, like Tatum got hurt in the last game, but at the same time, the Heat were up 3-0 before that, so they ended up just blowing 3 straight games. So I mean, I think for the Kings, like you said, it's hard to, just because you know what the ceiling is defensively and teams are going to target that. And you also just wonder, we mentioned De'Aaron Fox, but then like Sabonis, right? Because I think there are some matchups where he will be better, but then there's other matchups where I think he'll be a little bit more limited.
Sure.
And if you take him out of the series, I think it's going to be a lot harder
And
for the
we've
Kings.
seen that happen before.
Yeah, because the Warriors kind of took him out of that series, and they were still able to get to 7 games, because some other guys kind of stepped up at at points. But that's the problem. Can you rely on those other guys? Because again,
Right.
it can't just be De'Aaron Fox,
Yep.
being able to win you 4 out of 7 games. I don't think that's going to be the case. And he's great, but I don't. But again, like, is he a guy where like nobody else can do anything, but he single handedly carried them to a win? I don't know. There's only a handful of guys that I feel like that can do that, but who knows? I mean, there are some games where he can just kind of do whatever he wants, right?
Yeah.
Like the game where the Clippers beat the Kings. I mean, De'Aaron Fox had like 40 points, and it was like an easy 40 points where he was just getting past everybody,
Yeah.
getting everywhere he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so
He can
I
get to
think
the rack. He can hit a spin jumper. He can do the floater. Now he can shoot the three. It's over.
right. So that's again, that's the cool part is the ceiling is higher if one of their best guys is better, and De'Aaron
Sure.
Fox seems like so far he's better. He's taken a leap forward. So that's where you might feel better about the Kings in certain matchups because they may be able to just beat more teams if their best player is a better player. I
Right.
just think in certain matchups, if you can take Sabonis out, that just makes it a lot harder for the Kings because those are kind
Agreed.
of like two main offensive hubs, and if one of those guys is not, contributing, then like I said, then that means you have to bank on Malik Monk going off, which he can do, or like a Keegan Murray going off, which sometimes he can do, even though he's not like a high usage guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe you just get like a random game, from Harrison Barnes or something like
Yeah.
that.
Herder.
Yeah, or a Kevin Herter or something like that. It's just I don't know. I need to see who they match up against
Yeah.
before
They're
I.
frauds right now, man.
Yeah,
They're so shaky. That's the problem that I
right.
have with them.
And again, I still want to give them a ton of credit because
Agreed.
again, obviously, there've been there's been a lot of conversations about like did they lose the Indiana trade or whatever, and I think both teams that was about as close of a win-win as you can
Yeah. It's
get.
fifty
And so
fifty.
far, right now, the Kings have been better. I mean, like the Kings have made the playoffs, and they haven't won a playoff series, but um, at the same time, I don't think the Kings should be upset about it because again, they went from a perennial joke of a team to now they even though like you said you've considered them frauds, but like at the same time they are a perennial playoff team now where it's
Yeah.
like now you're surprised if they miss the playoffs because like they have a lot more talent now. It's a lot more structured and cohesive. I just feel like again, ideally, it would be nice to have like a guy that's a consistent third guy, just in case like you have a scenario where a guy like a Sabonis is just taken out, because that's
Yeah.
gonna happen sometimes. Because unlike a Fox, Fox, because he plays with the ball in his hands so much, he can get wherever he wants. So unless he just has like a horrible shooting night, it's going to be a lot more difficult, I think, to take him out of a series. Whereas Sabonis, even though he does initiate a lot of offense, he's still not like a Jokic, right? Where it's like, it doesn't really matter what you do. He's not that caliber of a guy. So
No.
when you're not a superstar, it's a lot easier to take you out of a series. And I think that's where it would be nice to have a consistent third option. And I just don't necessarily think they have that, because again, the third option doesn't matter as much when you have like a top five guy, at your disposal, or and say like maybe the number two guy is like a top 10 guy. But that's not the case with the Kings. And so that's where they need a little bit more help. So I do kind of wonder if they're a team that maybe explores something on the trade market.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
see.
but either way, yeah, shout out to De'Aaron Fox, because like you said,
Yeah.
he's been amazing this season, and he's again, like, it's he hasn't even played as much, because like you said, 13 games.
Hmm.
There was a stretch where he was out for a while and they were kind of reeling, and then they figured it out. Then he came back and then they kicked it up and turned it up another level. So
Yeah.
I still feel like there's a ceiling for that team. But again, De'Aaron Fox being better helps raise the ceiling at least a little bit.
Sure. Um, and yeah, for the final one, I'm kind of going to go out on a bang and a positive note. This one is kind of intriguing, I think. And I think it's very surprising. It's three guys, and I consider them legends. I think the majority of the NBA community would consider them legends. It's the play of Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and LeBron James. I don't think anybody expected them, specifically really LeBron and Kevin Durant, but I don't think anybody really expected them to be playing peak basketball. I mean, LeBron is efficient as heck. He's averaging 24 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, all in year 21 on 55% from the field. So that's phenomenal. I think people really wanted to see and expected a drop off, in terms of his play. I think people wanted to see the decline. I know a lot of haters did. But yeah, that is far from the case here. He's been playing very good basketball, and he hadn't really missed, any games. I don't think. He's
Nope,
well,
that's one game.
yeah,
Only
exactly.
one
So
game.
he's played 20 games, and his numbers look great throughout them. You can kind of see the slowdown in terms of some, nuances and intangible stuff, but in terms of the game, I mean, it still looks like he's doing this stuff, in his like fourth, fifth year in the league. So it is really interesting. And now I think that changes the entire Lakers landscape and what they're going to do potentially. Come down to the line, where it's like, when he's on his last year at his contract and stuff like that, or, maybe they extend him. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think, it is kind of interesting now that they don't have to think about, okay, yeah, this guy's declining, because I think he's been playing very well. Same thing with Kevin Durant, where it's like, okay, this guy's averaging 31 points per game, which is third in the league, which is ridiculous at his age. I think he's 35. So it's like, geez, and that's through 18 games. So he hasn't missed a ton of time. He's kind of been putting Phoenix on his back with Booker. So, and then even a guy like Steph, he's averaging 30 points, which is seventh in the league. These guys have not really missed a beat and dropped off like people thought they would due to their age. Steph, I think, is 35 as well. So it is kind of interesting that these guys are playing at the elite level that they always have. And there's been no drop off. And I think that's been really surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the cool thing, is that like, these guys are still hanging around. And some of these teams, are still in contention. Obviously, we'll say like the Lakers, or, obviously the Warriors, where they're down in the standings. Some of these other teams, seem like they're better, but at the same time, these guys have been far from the issues with their teams. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like you said, with Durant, he's averaging 31 a game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 50. I think from the field, and I think also from three. I think he's like
Yep.
49 from three, 90 from the free throw line. Right? Again, the Suns have been playing pretty well, and obviously he's only missed a couple of games, I think, so that's good to see. Considering, again, how we thought that he might be the guy that misses the most time just because of his age, and just because, again, for the most part, he's missed a lot of time the last few years. So that
Hmm.
obviously helps that you're still getting a great version of Durant.
Yes.
Um, with the Warriors for Steph, like you mentioned, he's been playing great. He hasn't missed much time either. I think he's only missed like 2 or 3 games.
Hmm.
He's kind of been the main thing that's kind of been keeping the Warriors together.
Yep.
Obviously, because again, it's been kind of rough for them this year, but he's definitely been a bright spot for them. The fact that he's still, one of the top players, again, that's why you don't want to completely give up on the team.
Right.
And then obviously, like you said, with LeBron in year 21, right? This is, I mean, we've seen the numbers where most guys by this point don't even start.
Yep.
Well, none of them have started, and none of them, I think, average more than like 7, 8 a game. And like you said, he's still averaging over 20 a game. Looking to me, I think at least offensively, definitely better than last year in
Mm-hmm.
terms of playoffs. I think because I think for a good chunk of last year before he hurt his foot, he looked very good, and then when he hurt the foot, he didn't look quite as good, right? But now, like you said, 55% from the field, which is crazy. I think he's one of the best at the rim.
Yep.
38% from three. It was a little over 40, and I don't think he's going to be a 40% three-point shooter. But last year he was like barely over 30, and part of that was like right at the end he had a hot streak. So he was really like in the 20s for a good chunk of last year from three. So if he can be anywhere around league average, like you said, that version of LeBron definitely helps you feel better about the Lakers' chances because they need him to be really good, if they want to try to contend for a title, right? There
Right.
can't really be a drop off, for him. Because, even if you feel like AD is their best player, I still feel like LeBron is their best offensive player, where
Agreed.
it's like, I feel like he's generally been pretty consistent on offense. You're not really like, hey, what happened, where it's like, one game you do this and then the other game you do that.
I would just go as far to say he is their best player, like LeBron is. Simple as that. Like I think he's just that good still, which is ridiculous.
I think it just depends because I do know, like, in terms of Lakers circles, some people would say AD just because of, the defense as well. I'm
Mm.
just saying, like, for sure he is their best offensive
Oh,
player.
yeah, guaranteed.
And in order to win, you need him to be like, on point, right? Like you can't have, on and off games from LeBron on offense, if you want a chance to win. Because again, like when your best offensive player is kind of hot and cold, you're not going to do too much. But the fact that the shooting is up, that's definitely like, pretty helpful. Because again, all these guys playing well bodes well for those teams' chances. Because those guys could be the best player on the floor in a playoff series. And if you have one of those guys, then you have a chance. And like for the Suns, it's different because their record is better. But I'm just saying, like, just in general, like you feel good about those guys, right now. Now they are playing a lot. They're playing a lot of minutes. So we'll
Yeah,
see, come playoff time if they kind of run out of gas. Um, but at the same time, either way, again, you still need one of those guys to be able to win you a chip. So, you know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
like obviously, like it would be great if they didn't have to play as many minutes and they could afford to take off some time. But either way, like they got to be available and play in order to win, right? You know
Yeah,
what I mean? That was the concern we had, you know, with all of them, right? Like, which guys, if any of those guys have to miss significant time, their team is going to be in trouble. But luckily, Durant has been, the guy for Phoenix that's played every game basically. So
yeah.
that's kind of helped keep it afloat, right? Where like, if he was missing a lot of time,
Oh, they'd
you,
be in the hole.
right, the whole thing kind of falls apart. I
Hmm.
mean, same with, if LeBron or Steph have to miss significant time, it feels like, it would be pretty rough. Because last year for the Warriors, right, there was a stretch where Steph was out, but they were kind of able to hang on. But it doesn't feel like that this year because even like, the two games where Steph was out, I mean, it was not great. I mean, like,
Right.
I mean, I know Draymond was also out, but like Chris Paul was there, Clay was there, Wiggins was there.
They had
Um,
enough to get wins that they should have won. Simple as that.
Yeah, and like, again, we haven't seen a long, prolonged stretch, where LeBron or Durant has been out yet. I think the Suns did fine because Booker was back, while Durant was out.
Yeah.
So,
I think he
that
put up
kind of
like
helped.
30 or something
Yeah,
in their
and
last
that's
game.
the thing with the Suns and the Lakers is it's also nice to have, another guy, that's on a similar tier so that way, if one of those guys has to miss time or if they just have like an off night, right? Like,
Yeah.
that helps, to have one of those guys, right? Like, say for the Suns you have Booker. And then maybe Beal in the waiting, we'll see. And then obviously for the Lakers, you have AD. For the Warriors, the main thing is you don't have that guy necessarily, where you don't have a second guy where you can, feel pretty comfortable about what they're going to do every night. You would think it would be Clay, but it doesn't seem like he's going to be that guy. Even though, again, I still feel like he can be productive, but I don't think he's going to be the same guy. And then Wiggins also, you need him to be good as well. Um, and I think he's been better as of late. But if he's not, to me, like, championship year Wiggins, that's a problem because I already know Clay is not going to be the same guy. So that's where it would be nice to have a bounce back year for Wiggins. And if he's not the same guy, then again, I don't really think you have a great shot, no matter what the rest of the bench guys do.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I know, I mean, I know it's nice to have that depth, but again, you're gonna probably win mainly on your core guys, and then you need at least a couple other guys. And again, like all of those guys have to be good.
Yeah.
So hopefully, again, We'll see that for these teams, but
Yeah, they've been
like I
balling
said,
though, man.
like you said, those guys individually have been great. And again, like the Suns, their record is good, and even the Lakers are above 500, so you're not really complaining. But just in general, those three guys have been the bright spots definitely for all of their teams.
Yeah,
Where it's like,
exactly.
they've been the guys that have kept everything humming, right? Where it's like if it wasn't for them, I don't know where any of those teams would be right now. So
Yeah, they'd be in the trash can for real.
yeah. So now we got, news and rumors. We have a decent amount, to talk about. So we'll go through a decent amount of them. So the first one, which we, didn't necessarily talk about last time, but Mark Cuban, right? He's selling his ownership, I guess, of the Mavs. He's actually in kind of a sweet spot where he got to sell it, I think, for $3.5 billion, according to Shams. But he also gets to obtain, control of the team. It still has a big say in terms of what they do. So he still gets
Yeah.
to like effectively run the team and control the team. He just no longer is the primary owner. So that's kind of a sweet deal where you get money off of it and you also get to still control it. I'm curious as to what the reason behind it is, and I think also one of the Pacers owners I think sold his share of the team if I'm not mistaken as of recently. So I
Mhm.
don't know like what the reasoning is. Where like we've seen some guys sell some teams because you almost wonder like with some of the stuff coming up like I think their media contract will be up at some point. So you do kind of wonder what's going on, but at the same time, I mean that's a pretty good deal if you're Mark Cuban.
Yeah. I mean, like that's he might be the greatest negotiator of all time. How do you, get out of, you know, having any ownership in the team, gaining money, and then also still keeping the job that you love and enjoy? I think it's more so like maybe he might be getting a little. I don't know what his age is. I don't want to actually come out and say
65,
that.
65.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to come out and say that, but I was gonna say, maybe he's getting up in age and he just doesn't want to, deal with the stress factors anymore. I don't know, but regardless, I mean, it is a crazy money move, like you said. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he bought it for 285 million in
Yeah,
2000.
that's
Uh,
crazy.
so over 20 years ago. So now, I mean, that's a huge return
That's a
on
crazy
your investment.
investment.
So I mean, that's pretty wild. So
Yeah,
again, that's wild deal. I'm curious to see where the Mavs go from there because again, he was kind of riding high on the Luca train, and again, he still gets to control the team. It seems like, but now we'll see what the new incoming ownership does. Even though again, it seems like he's still going to have control, but
yeah,
either way, that's pretty significant. But
very, very
like
big
I said,
deal.
I do wonder what, like you said, what the reasoning is. It could be a number of factors.
Hmm.
It wasn't really cited or anything. They were just
Right,
kind of saying sold the team. And it could just be, hey, because I get $3.5 billion and
right,
still get to control the team. Why wouldn't you do that? So I mean,
right.
it could be as simple as that. Like that, it's just a great deal, and you can't pass that one up. I mean, again,
Yeah,
$3.5 billion for a team that you still get to control. I mean, yeah, I think everybody would want
yeah.
that.
That's probably what it was.
Yeah. Next up, according to Woes, the Levine trade market just hasn't developed, isn't really there. It seems like a lot of
Figured.
it's tied to contract, mixed with production because he hasn't been that amazing this year. I mean, obviously the Bulls as a whole have been horrible, so that's probably plays a factor as well. They had a weird game where Levine and DeRozan were both out, and they managed to pull off a win over the Bucks, so that was kind of bizarre. But either way, um, that doesn't surprise me. I think we both kind of said that it was, of the main guys, it was probably more likely that like, like a Caruso or like a DeRozan might get moved
Hmm.
before Levine, just because I just think there's issues with the contract. And again, like it's 40 million. So the thing is, he can help a team, but at the same time, you have to give up a lot in order to get him. And is he the guy that's worth it? Because, again, we've seen some teams, make those um moves and then it ended up not working out, right? Like the Lakers traded for Russell Westbrook, because they thought he could be that third guy
Right.
and it didn't work out. And when it doesn't work out, it can go horribly.
Yep.
Um and you can completely, mess up your team. I mean, like they basically had a year and a half where they were, where they kind of like, you know, were not at all a relevant team because they were, because they made a bad mistake. So we'll see if a team ends up kind of trading for Levine because, the trade market will even out as we get closer to the deadline where more teams will be like, oh, this is what we actually are. Maybe we're not as good as we thought. So maybe we'll start moving some guys. Um, and there may be another star that might be better than Levine that's on the market. We'll see, but it doesn't surprise me. I just feel like again the issue is the contract because again, like DeRozan, I feel like is harder to fit in because he's not a great outside shooter, but at the
Yeah.
same time, the contract is a lot easier to manage. Um, I think it's like at 28 million. It's just it's also an expiring, so then it's like if it doesn't work, you can get out of it, and you probably just don't have to give up as much. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll see that, but I don't know. But like I said, this doesn't surprise me. I just feel like again he's a good player, and I think he could help a team. But 40 million is a lot to kind of put up, to send out because we already talked about it. Say with a team like the Lakers, you'd have to give up like three guys. I mean, like you'd have to toss in like D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, and then probably another third guy, and that just feels like a lot to give up for Levine. And like, how much better is he going to make you? I mean, he could make you better, but you're not necessarily sure. And I don't feel like it's a great idea to make a trade like that if you're not necessarily sure how much better he actually makes you on his
Yeah.
own.
I think someone will bite eventually. Like I said, I think the past few times we talked about this, I've been thinking that as we inch closer to the deadline, I think that's when we'll probably start hearing, the real rumors start to surface, and then it's like, okay, teams are going to start offering packages that do make sense because of the predicaments that they're in and the situations that they're in.
Exactly. So moving on, according another Bulls rumor, according to Casey Johnson of NBC Sports Chicago, Drummond could also draw interest. Doesn't really surprise me. I mean, he, as a backup center, I mean, that's probably fine. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
I don't necessarily think you want him playing like huge minutes
Nope.
anymore, but again, in limited minutes, he can still get you rebounds. He can still be kind of a threat, on the interior at times. So, I mean, it's not a big contract. It's like $5-6 million. So, I mean, like $5-6 million for a backup center. If you need a backup center, I mean, you might as
Come to the
well.
Wizards, man. We need you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, again, like if you have $5-6 million to just give to the Bulls in terms of a contract, I mean, you might as well. You could do a lot worse, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And I think, he'll provide some sort of impact as a backup, like you were saying.
Yeah. And then, according to Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports, Pistons not shopping Jaden Ivey. I mean, again,
Hmm.
like, it is the situation is bizarre, but at the same time, if I'm the Pistons, I'm not quite ready to like ship him off just yet. I mean, it is a weird fit between him and Cade, but you also just have a weird team. So I think the main focus should be to ship off some of the vets. Now some of them aren't playing, so how much value do they have right now? But I think that should be the main focus. I think some of the young guys you might want to hold on. Maybe like you said, a Killian Hayes because I think he's in the last year of his deal. I think he's in what is he, year 3 or 4? I can't
I
even
think it
remember.
might be 4 now. It has to be
Yeah,
4.
so yeah, so if it's 4, you're gonna have to pay him if you want to keep him. And I mean, maybe you want to pay to keep him, but if you're not sure at all, then that I think would be one of the guys that you would look at first. But then at the same time, how many teams are really super interested in him? I don't know. So it's not surprising. I think that they're not going to shop him yet. And again, I don't think a lot of teams are all that into shopping guys just yet, anyways, because
No,
I
it's
think
too
we're
early.
just not quite there yet. December 15th is the first day where you can start trading guys that sign contracts in the offseason, but only certain guys. I think it's guys that were not like bird rights guys or things like that. So it like the guys that maybe you just grab from another team, those are the guys you can trade on December 15th. But
Okay.
guys that you re-sign, I think through bird rights, those are the guys that you have to wait for, and that's I
Yeah.
think January 15th. So
But like
we still have a little bit, a little ways to go before like everybody can start just throwing guys into the trade machine.
but with a guy like Jaden Ivey, it just makes me wonder, like, it's not like he fell out of the rotation completely. It just seems like he hasn't been the guy, that they hoped that he would be, when they drafted him. So I'm not really sure. And I think it's what, year 2 or 3 for him?
It's year 2.
That's crazy. It feels like it's like year 3, but I mean the lack of production that we've kind of seen from him is very disappointing. So I do understand their hesitancy to move on from him, but at the same time, I mean, why do you even have him if the guy doesn't really fit your system?
Right. I mean, he's played 16 games, only started in 6, 23 minutes a game. The efficiency's up. He was at
Sure.
41% last year. Now he's a little under 50, which is good.
Yeah.
35 from 3, 11.5 points, 3 assists, a little under a steal. It's just a weird fit, I think. But at
Exactly.
the same time, I mean, like again, you're not a team. You're 2-18, so you're clearly not in a position to really worry much about fit. You got to just play your best guys and just kind of just go through the pain and struggles. Because again, why does the fit matter if you're 2-18? Whatever you were doing before was not working. I mean, again, they
Exactly.
literally went an entire month without winning a game. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Next up, DeMar DeRozan, if he were to be traded according to Sam Amick of the Athletic, he would prefer the Miami Heat or the New York Knicks. I mean, again, doesn't really surprise me. I mean, those teams have kind of been teams that have been in trade rumors for a while. Uh,
Mhm.
I do kind of wonder what the package would be if it was, those teams. I mean, like if it's the Heat, is it Tyler Hero? I mean, then you have, two
I wouldn't
forwards and
do that.
Butler and Jimmy. I don't know. And then like, if it's the Knicks, I mean, like, is it RJ Barrett? But then it's like, would I gladly give up RJ Barrett for DeMar DeRozan? Maybe, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm there.
I'd
Um,
rather give up Julius Randle.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, but then it's like, you know, who's your like? I guess DeRozan plays a lot more four now in Chicago, but then it's like, is he actually a four on a good team?
I think he
Like
could be.
yeah, like but it's wild because again, he came into the league as a two guard.
I know, it's crazy.
In Chicago, he's been a forward, and then like at sometimes he's been a power forward. I think even for the Spurs, there were stretches where he was at the
Yeah.
four. So it's kind of bizarre. Um, but at the same time, I would like to see, if he's a guy that a team, jumps at. Because again, I don't necessarily know. We don't really know right now, like what stars are on the trade market, other than I guess Levine. But you know, I don't know. DeRozan may be a more desirable player for teams than Levine, because I don't think there's a huge gap between the two players in terms of talent, and also DeRozan's on a much better contract. I mean, the issue is it's an expiring deal, so if it doesn't work and he walks, then you just gave up something, for nothing.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't know. Like, which I don't. It's weird because again, I would think Levine because of his shooting would be an easier fit, but at the same time, DeRozan just because he's been a veteran on some like decent teams, he might just like locker room wise like may just be better to fit in. Like you may not be worried as much about like I don't know ego or touches or
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't know because I don't know any of these guys personally, obviously, but I would be kind of intrigued to see like what the package is for for both of those teams because clearly because yeah, it seems like he has a preference. I don't feel like he should be the caliber of guy right now that should just be able to dictate where he goes.
Right.
But I also understand. I'm sure every guy has a preference for where they would like to play.
Yeah.
Not just the stars, but also like the guys that are like in the lower tier. Like even like a role player might have a preference of where they want to play. Um, but I don't know. Like between those two teams, which one do you think is probably better suited for him? Like, or do you
Mm.
think that there's like a third team that would probably just be better than either of those two teams?
I mean, I like the Knicks. I think that would be the perfect opportunity for New York to move on from Julius Randle. I haven't really followed his numbers, so I'm not sure, what his stats are looking like. I don't know if he's been on the up and up, but I know early in the season it was dog water. But the thing with Julius Randle, I just don't. I never really liked the fit in New York. I just always felt like his game had a specific ceiling. And yeah, I'm looking at his stats: 41% from the field, still horrible, and then 27 from the three. Yeah, it's still pretty bad. So yeah, I'd probably take DeMar DeRozan to New York. I think that would be interesting. I just don't think Miami needs to do anything. You know what I mean? I think Miami, they have the culture, they have the guys. Hero's just out, and that's just a part of the game. Well, he might be back actually. Yeah, he is back.
Yeah, I think Miami should be in a little bit more of a wait and see approach because
Exactly.
again, there's so many guys out. So it's like let's see what it looks like. We're still above 500, so let's see what it looks like when we have all of our guys back for like, a few weeks
Yeah, exactly.
for a stretch of like 10 games or 10, 15 games or something like that. And then I guess the other thing for the Knicks is that if you could get DeRozan, it's also, not only is it like a get out of Julius Randle free card, but like also at the same time, it's, I already mentioned it, it's an expiring contract. So if it doesn't work and then DeRozan walks, well, then you might have freed up some cap space,
Exactly.
and maybe you might be able to like trade for a guy or something or sign a guy. I don't know off the top of my head how much cap space that would create, if any, but it might give you some more flexibility, right?
Exactly.
Then like you can figure out a way to get off of Fournier, right? And DeRozan's money is off the books. That might give you some money to chase a guy, but at the same time, this free agency class I don't think is really all that great.
Mm-mm.
So it might just come in a scenario where you might just have to trade for a guy. But again, if you can
It's
and
doable.
you have the ability to, you might as well do it. So I think
Exactly.
that's the scenario where I think if you're the Knicks, maybe you want to go for it. But again, I just don't know what the package would be. Like, would the Bulls take Julius Randle? Maybe they would, but then it's like, I don't know.
They'd have to. That's
It's
the
like,
only thing
yeah,
that's going on, and they
yeah,
have
'cause,
to.
like I'm not ready to give up on like I think RJ Barrett's been pretty good for the Knicks. I think
Yeah.
he's been better than Julius Randle, so I'm not really
Yeah, he's
ready to just
untouchable.
yeah, I'm not ready to bail on RJ Barrett yet. So I mean, he's on a big contract, but still, like I'm not ready to give up on him because I think he's been better than Randall. So in the
Yeah,
games he's played,
for
so we'll
sure.
see. Next up, another Jake Fisher rumor, according to him. a lot of people around the league do not expect Miles Bridges to be back
Yeah,
in
I heard
Charlotte.
about this one.
So I guess the idea of like maybe there's a possibility that he gets moved to another team maybe around the deadline, or he just signs with another team. Um, that's kind of interesting because again, with Charlotte, obviously we know what happened with the Bridges stuff going on, off the court. So obviously that's an issue. Um, but then at the same time, I wonder like, is that the reason why Charlotte wouldn't bring him back, or is it more so like, well, we just don't want to necessarily like give a ton of money, spend a ton of money on a roster that may just not be that good. I don't know. Um, but that'd be pretty rough to lose a player like that for nothing, if he walks. So I do wonder if his name kind of starts coming up in trade rumors. But then obviously, it was kind of like the other situation, with Kevin Porter Jr., where like if you're a team, you're gonna have to take on the PR hit. But unlike the Kevin Porter Jr. thing, you're not trading for Bridges to cut him and waive him. You're trading for him to actually have him play. So I do wonder, if that's what Charlotte does, or do they just kind of wait it out and let it walk? Because I feel like Charlotte has the potential to probably end up trading and some guys and putting them, getting them out of the roster, just because again they've not been that great. And obviously, since Lamelo Ball is going to be out for a while, you're probably not going to win a whole lot of games with him out, anyways.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's might be time to move on from some of these guys like a Hayward, or I don't know, or maybe even a Bridges. But that'd be pretty rough if you're like in a situation where you could have had Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. You drafted him on draft night. You traded him for Bridges, who's still a solid player, but he's not Shea. And now you also have to worry about the off the court stuff as well, which you don't have to worry about with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. So I don't know. That's a pretty bizarre situation for Charlotte, and not really one that I really expected. I kind of assumed if somebody wasn't coming back, it probably wouldn't have been one of the young guys. I would have assumed it would have been like a Hayward, or maybe even a Rozier or somebody like that. Just or one of those other random young guys that just isn't playing that well.
Yeah, because even like if we look at Bridges, this is what makes me think it's political. Like he's averaging 20 points, through the 8 games that he's played. So on 50% shooting, it is a small sample size, but I think he's been very good for them so far. But it's definitely the off the court stuff for sure. I think they just want to move on from him due to that, and yeah, they're just probably going to let him play and see if they can get a good trade offer for him.
I do kind of wonder, like, and then also I guess with Charlotte, maybe the thought process is like we also need to just start getting some other defensive minded guys because again he can score and he's not like a terrible defender, but again Charlotte's a team that just doesn't have a lot of good defensive
Yeah,
guys, and like maybe the thought process is we get Lamelo, you know, at some point in the future with another guard. And again, I like Rozier. I think he's a solid player, but and I think he fits well. But ideally, I think he'd like to have a more defensive-minded guard next to Lamelo because you're not going to get a lot of defense from him. Miller seems like he's got some potential as a two-way guy. Mark Williams as well. It's just all about what's that piece at the four, and it may not be Bridges at this point. It might have to be someone else down the line, and maybe that. And I think that could be it, where like you said, it's a mixture of the stuff off the court, and maybe with the new ownership, maybe they might just be like, yeah, let's go in a different direction as
right.
well. We'll try to see if we can find some other defensive minded guys as well. And because, again, I think that's part of Charlotte's struggles as well. So we'll see. But yeah, I think that all those things I think play into it. Like, I think it's a mixture of the off the court stuff. The counting stats haven't even been bad, but just like long term, since you have Brandon Miller, maybe you might feel like it might be a little bit duplicative, to have both of those guys on the roster. And maybe you might be like, yeah, we like PJ Washington long term as a more natural fit at the four. So then let's have him, let's have Mark Williams, Miller, Lamelo, and then maybe find another guard and then kind of go from there. I don't know, but like I said, I'm thinking that could be what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then after that, do you think that there's a team where he might be a good fit? Because again, he's on the qualifying offer, which is a little under 8 million. Because he's on the qualifying offer, he can block a trade. I guess it's like a de facto no trade clause, so you can kind of dictate the terms of where he goes. But like, do you think there's a team where like that could be like, yeah, we need this, scoring and athleticism from the forward spot? What team do you think that would be, or or do you think like he might just be, I don't know, just sitting out?
Yeah, I would say like fit wise, game wise, I would say Golden State or maybe like the Lakers or something like that. But I don't think they're gonna pick up that locker room presence. I don't think they're that kind of team. But basketball wise, I think that would help them out tremendously. But I can't really think of anybody. I've always thought of him as just like the potential cornerstone alongside Lamelo to that franchise. So I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to think of a place for him to go because I've always thought of him that way.
A while, because again, Charlotte a few years ago was a playing team, and it looked like they were on the up and up.
Yeah,
And now it's just kind of been not great. I
yeah,
mean,
it's been
again,
horrible.
there's a couple of bright spots. I mean, again, I like Mark Williams. I like Brandon Miller. Lamelo Ball's played well, even though he's been hurt, and that's been the issue for him is in terms of staying on the floor. But again, they need to they need to start kind of looking for two-way guys. They kind of need to stop just picking up guys that are scorers
Sure.
because they've drafted a lot of those guys,
Yeah.
and some of those guys have panned out, but then some of those guys have not panned out so much. Um, and that's where I think they need to kind of start going in a different direction. Because again, you've
Yeah.
already committed money to Lamelo, so he's a part of the future. So now it's just about finding guys around him, and maybe you don't have a super high ceiling as a team, but just in general, like I think you got to figure out something because I think
Yeah.
what they have clearly isn't working, and
Yeah, they
I
got to
think it's
retool some stuff.
and I think it starts with there's too many offensive oriented players, and you're not even like a great offensive team. So it's
Right.
like, that's the other thing. It would be one thing if you're like a top, 5, top 10 offense, with Lamelo out there. But if you're not, then it's like, what's the point? You need to, because you have some good offensive players, but you need to be a more well balanced roster, and I think that's what they got to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, then after that, according to Zach Lowe of ESPN, this to me is not a surprise. Doesn't look like the Warriors will trade Clay. I mean, I didn't really think that was going to happen anyways.
Mm.
Um, my thought process still remains that he'll eventually sign a new deal. I don't think it'll be as much as he would like. But I don't think he should get as much as he would like because I don't think
No.
he's been as good. So
Just play
I
like
think
hot dog water.
yeah. So I think ultimately, I think they'll come to terms on some type of mutual contractual agreement, and he'll stay because I just don't see him going anywhere else. And again, I think he still sees himself as a guy that's worth a lot of money. So like I don't think so unless like he gets traded to some random team and gets bought out, which I don't think is happening at all. Like I think he's gonna remain a Warrior for life. I still feel like that those three guys, Steph, Clay, and Draymond, will stay Warriors together until they retire, whenever that is, and they'll just kind of see if they can find ways to contend around that. And if they may not have any more chances, but I think that's probably what they want to do. I don't think they want to break up that group.
Yeah, I'm in the group or I'm in the minority where I think a lot of people, or not a lot of people, think Clay is cooked. I think he's cooked. I don't really have any belief in it. I've seen it before with other players, and people just got to come to terms with it. I think he's done. I don't think he's going to be the elite shooter that he once was, and I'd be in favor of them moving on from him. But if that's the rumor, that's the rumor.
And then last but not least, Terrence Ross. So he's decided to hang it up. He announced it on his podcast. He was a guy, where he kind of had an interesting career, right? He was drafted by Toronto, um, and kind of, made himself a reputation for himself as kind of like a microwave, scorer with, crazy athleticism.
Hmm.
So he was always kind of an entertaining player. And then eventually, he ended up in Orlando, right, for a while. Was always like in trade rumors a lot, where it seemed like he was always tied to something. I remember always hearing rumors about the Lakers being interested in him like every single year.
Right.
Um, right, and then last year, right, he got bought out. It was initially reported that he was going to go to Dallas, but then he went to Phoenix. And to try, I guess, to have an attempt at maybe winning a title. And he played a decent amount for them, 18 minutes a game. And then in the playoffs, it kind of dipped, just didn't play as well. And, now it seems like his career is done. But, again, 11 points a game, 3 rebounds, a little over an assist, 42 from the field, 36 from three. So a solid 3-point shooter. But yeah, so he's decided to hang it up.
Yeah. I mean, like, congrats on the retirement. I thought he had a very successful and entertaining career, like you said. And the funny thing is, I had an interaction with him when I was on PlayStation when I was 15 years old. We were playing 2K15, and I mean, he literally allowed me to play with him in the park. So shout out to Terrence Ross, man. It's a core memory for me from video games. But yeah, he seems like he's always been a stand-up dude. I know he's been doing his Twitch thing or streaming thing. So, I hope he continues to do that and entertain people off the court as well.
Former eighth pick of the
Yes, sir.
Toronto Raptors, Terrence Ross, he's hanging it up. So,
Yeah.
congrats, like you
Congrats,
said,
bro.
for a solid NBA career. Again, 11 seasons in the NBA. Not everybody gets to play
Yeah.
11 seasons in the NBA. Most people actually don't get to play any. So,
Exactly.
if you can get more than 10 seasons, you can say, like, I had a successful NBA career.
Yeah, he's legit.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on, our surprises, both good and bad over the course of this 20-game stretch. Obviously, we got a big week coming up in the NBA because we have the second round of the in-season tournament, right? The knockout round, right? The winners of these games, will determine who gets to go to Vegas for the semifinals, and then eventually the in-season tournament championship, right? So make sure to check that out, and obviously, continue to check our content out because we continue to appreciate all the support. Like I said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for all of that, and we will see you Friday.